Hello and welcome to the final games event for Confetti Industry Week 2021. This event is the one that I've been looking forward to all week. When we were planning Industry Week, I, being the newly appointed curriculum lead for games, told my staff members to approach people in the industry that they admired, and because we were doing a virtual industry week, we'd have the opportunity to approach people we wouldn't normally be able to approach. And leading by example, I approached these guests and they said yes. So I'm so happy to welcome Brenda and John Romero to Confetti Industry Week 2021. I suppose it would be good to sort of say hello to Brenda and John now as well, because it seems rude for me to welcome you and not be able to say hello. So do you want to just say hello quickly and then I'll cut back to the rest of the intro?
Yeah, sure. We're really excited to be here. We're glad you reached out. We've heard a lot about confetti, and we're just looking forward to, I guess, giving a talk and also taking loads of QA. So thanks for making not QA, Q&A. So thanks for leaving lots of time for that. That'll be super fun.
Great.
Yeah, I'm excited to talk. It'll be
Thanks,
fun.
John. So I hope you all enjoyed today's session, and again a massive thank you to John and Brenda for being here today. It's our 15th Industry Week. It's probably the most surreal one because of this virtual element, but actually it's been really exciting as well. We've had some great guests in the games team over the week. Hopefully you've enjoyed those talks. Remember that most of the talks are going to be available on demand afterwards on our channel exclusively for students. You will need to log in with your Confetti emails to be able to view those, but the links are available on the Industry Week website. Also remember, as part of Confetti Industry Week 2021, you are in with a chance of winning some cool prizes. So all you have to do is post a picture on Twitter or Instagram and tag it with hashtag IW21 and share your experiences through the week. This is the last opportunity you're going to have to share a games experience today, but boy, what an opportunity it is. John and Brenda, just to quickly say as well, when we get to the end of the call, what we're going to do, we're going to boot all the students out, and we'd like you to just hang on the call just so we can have a quick chat to you and a debrief at the end, if that's okay. Because there's going to be so many students in the session, though, that might take a few minutes. We've got getting on for 350, I think, in now, so not too shabby. So yeah, if you just hang on the call at the end, and I'll just go through some stuff at the end with you. And now, without further ado, it's time to hand over to John and Brenda, and I'm going to sit back and enjoy these talks. Fantastic. Thank you very much again for being here.
Great. I'm going to be going first, everybody. So, welcome. It's really great for me to be here and talk to a bunch of people that love games and really want to make games. And my talk is basically about the same thing that you guys are doing right now. I'm going to talk about how I grew up and what got me excited about games and how I started to make games and, how it led to id Software. So, I'm going to start my talk right now, and I'm excited to answer your questions later as well. So here we are. So, welcome everyone. I'm John Romero, co-founder of id Software, and I'm going to take you on a journey back to the beginning of id Software. Are you ready to be entertained? I can't hear you. Okay. I do realize that some of what I'm about to say may sound insane, but we were in our 20s when we started id Software, and we didn't know that there were any limits. So I grew up in a wonderful small town in Northern California. It was named Rockland, and the population was only 6,000 people back then. In the 70s, I was massively addicted to spending tons of time in dark arcades and playing all the games there as they were released and getting really good at them. In 1979, before anyone had a computer at home, including me, I went to the local college when I was 11 years old, and I started learning BASIC from the college students. I just went up to them and I asked them what the words in their listings meant, and I wrote them down on paper and started to experiment with them on another teletype machine that was connected to the mainframe at the school. To keep me at home, my parents got an Apple II Plus eventually, and then I was done going outside. I spent all of my time programming games on that computer. So a few years and about 20 Apple II games later, I finally learned 6502 assembly language, the language that all fast arcade games are written in. Then I could really make 80s games like these. Well, not quite arcade games, but home computer games, which were on the Apple II. Let's just say that the Apple II was my personal home arcade, as well as 1 million other Apple owners at the time. When I was a sophomore in high school, I did some programming for the Air Force when I was 15 years old. We lived in England. We moved to England, and my stepfather worked for the Air Force. And in order to get into the high school coding class, I showed the teacher that I could program in 6502 assembly, and I ended up at the aggressor squadron the next day. I was literally coding in a vault. Because I was a kid, they gave me false data to use with my code. Can't tell you what I was programming, that's classified. It's an odd but true story. So after high school, I kept making games, of course, and by 1987, I got my first job at Origin Systems. My first job was porting 2400 AD from the Apple II to the Commodore 64. By this time, I'd made 74 games in 3 previous startup game companies, Capital Idea Software, Inside Out Software, where I ported Might and Magic 2 to the Commodore 64, and Ideas from the Deep, and I was 21 years old. I went to work at a company named Softdisk at the start of 1989. I learned how to program a DOS PC there, and I made a small game or utility per month for about a year. And then I created a game product called Gamer's Edge at Softdisk, and I had to hire a team of game developers. So I hired John Carmack and Adrian Carmack, not related, into my department for programming and art. And then Tom Hall came in at night to help us out since he was already at Softdisk and he loved making games. And this was the first time that any of us had worked with another person on a game after we had been making games alone for 10 years each. It was incredible. While creating our first game together, Slordax, John Carmack discovered the smooth scrolling trick on the PC. Tom Hall and John stayed up until 5 a.m. making a demo called Dangerous Dave and Copyright Infringement. The next day, I saw the disc on my desk, I ran the demo, and I watched the screen scroll smoothly pixel by pixel. It was a massive eureka moment for me. It was like a bolt of lightning. I'll elaborate on why in a moment, but id Software was born that instant on September 20th of 1990. One thing led to another, and we spent a week putting together a demo of Super Mario 3 for Nintendo, which they liked, but they decided not to publish because they decided to only publish their games on their own NES platform, which was a really smart move. That's no problem. We used the tech for a different game, the Commander Keen trilogy. So why would a side-scroller be a huge hit on PCs in 1990? Well, because no games on the PC could scroll horizontally smoothly per pixel at the time. The PC had been out since August of 1981, but in 9 years, no one had figured out how to make the screen scroll smoothly per pixel until the Dangerous Dave and Copyright Infringement demo, which led to Commander Keen. The Commander Keen trilogy provided the start of the company, and we made these 3 games in 3 months from September 20th to December 14th in 1990. It was a massive hit for us, and it was so popular that people cosplayed as Keen for years at events, and they still do. This game pioneered the creation of game engines. We designed the game as an engine that operated on different data for different games. It was the only way that we could get this trilogy done so quickly. In fact, in 1991, when we were working on Commander Keen 4, we started licensing that engine for the first time. It was the beginning of the modern engine licensing business, which is now dominated by Unity and Unreal. Development on our games went very smoothly and quickly because we stuck to some core principles that are important even today. These are kind of programmery, so if you're a coder out there, pay attention. Through this talk, I'm going to highlight some of our core principles. I'd like to highlight something else right now, namely this photo. Has anyone seen this picture before? It's a picture of us at our lake house in Shreveport, Louisiana. The funny thing is that people have asked me for years what was in this picture, so I analyzed it recently, and here's what you see. This is John and me in early September 1990. We were working on the Super Mario 3 demo that we planned on sending to Nintendo. we both worked on this huge Dungeons and Dragons table that John had. We used to play D&D on the weekends, and those sessions led to ideas for future games like Doom and Quake. This is John and me. Tom Hall took the photo. These computers were brought home from work on the weekends, so this photo was taken on a Saturday or a Sunday. On top of the monitor is one of those old Intel reflective astronaut plushies. To my left is my notepad, which was a task list of bugs to fix. And this is our high-level task list of what we had to get done to finish the demo. It's just a whiteboard. This is Tom Hall's area on the right. This is where he was doing all the graphics for the demo. He recorded the gameplay of Mario on a VCR, and he could play it back, and he could pause the action so he could duplicate the tiles exactly in Deluxe Paint 2, which was basically Photoshop of the 80s. The TV set had a 13-channel selector on it, and it was connected by an RF modulator. It was very old school. So id Software was formally founded on February 1st of 1991. The company is 30 years this year. We made 12 games that year. Shadow Knights, Dangerous Dave in the Haunted Mansion, Rescue Rover. You see all these titles up here. We actually took 2 months per game, but we made 2 games simultaneously typically. So this was due to having 10 years of intense game development experience before this, but it was also due to our first principle, which was no prototypes. Just make the game, polish as you go, don't depend on polish happening later, always maintain constantly shippable code. This is how we made so many games so quickly. We had the entire game in our heads. Of course, these were not giant games, but what we just needed to do was quantify what had to get finished, and just we worked on that stuff until the game was done. So there were no prototypes for any of the games that we made. We just made those games. And got to remember that we did have a very small team of only 4 people back then, and we could absolutely do this back then. Large teams definitely require more planning. So time for a quick story. One day it rained really hard, and Cross Lake in Louisiana, it rose and it was flooding everywhere, and I needed to get to work. We were furiously working away on our games, and I really had to get back into it. So I just got ready for work and drove down the street, and I saw this. The entire road was flooded. So guess what I did? I just waded through the huge flood and the water snakes and everything all the way to the house. And then I took another shower and I got back to work. Like, we were all so excited to be making our own games 24/7. It didn't matter what we had to do to get back to work. So also note that during this year of 12 games, we moved id Software from Louisiana to Wisconsin as well. So that takes a lot of time out of game development. But we couldn't afford to have anything go wrong while we were making our games at that pace. So we created another principle that kept us developing quickly. It's incredibly important that your game can always be run by your team. So bulletproof your engine by providing defaults on load failures. So if you have 100 people trying to make a game that won't run, you're paying for 100 people to sit around and wait for it to get fixed. So we recognize the importance of keeping the game always playable, and we decided we're going to bulletproof our engine by making all inputs solid. So game engines typically fail because they're trying to load bad, corrupted, or non-existent data. So checking for this and providing a default for that data will keep the game running quickly, and it will show you what's missing. So for example, if you can't load a sprite, show a bagel. If the theme song isn't loading, play something obviously horrible for your game. Missing sound effect, some horrible sound effect, same thing. So after 1991, id Software's first stage of company development was complete, and another important principle was in effect. Keep your code absolutely simple. Keep looking at your functions and figure out how you can simplify further. We wrote all of our games, including Quake, in C, not C++. Okay, so stage 2 was about to begin. In August of 1991, we decided to move to Madison, Wisconsin, like I said before. Tom Hall and I visited at that time. We found it to be really nice, since Tom used to live there while he was in college. So we moved all of us there, and we continued working on our games. Only 4 months later, we're found dead in the snow, victims of Wisconsin's brutal winters that we did not research. Moral of the story, do your research. We knew how to program an assembly language, but not how to ask Tom Hall, hey, what are winters like up here? So after 6 months, we moved down to Texas. So here's a new principle. Great tools help make great games. Spend as much time on tools as possible. I wrote a tile editor in 1991 named Ted, tile editor. Ted was used for 33 shipped retail games. Several of those games were 3D, like Hover Tank, Catacomb 3D, Wolfenstein 3D, Spirit Destiny, Rise of the Triad, Corridor 7, and others. So it's January 1992. We decided we're going to go all 3D based on Catacomb 3D's promise. Catacomb 3D looked kind of cool. It just didn't play cool. So we made Wolfenstein 3D. Wolfenstein took 4 months of development time for us to get from the idea to the shareware launch with 1 episode of levels. It took 2 months extra to finish all 6 episodes and to create a hint book for that game. In the first month, with no advertising, it sold 4,000 copies, all for $60 each. So Spirit Destiny took 2 months. We worked on it right after Wolfenstein. It's a prequel to Wolfenstein 3D, and it was retail only. And then soon after that, Tom Hall traveled to Kentucky to work for a couple months on Wolfenstein VR. Yes, 1992 VR. So back in the days of Commander Keen, I discovered a small 3-person company called Raven Software in Madison, Wisconsin. They're making Amiga games. So I called them up and I went over and we just introduced ourselves. And he flashed forward 7 months later and we did some work with them by modifying the Wolfenstein 3D engine, and we licensed it to them and Electronic Arts for a game called Shadowcaster. So Shadowcaster's tech improvements were sloping floors, lighting, and fog. This engine looked slightly better than Wolfenstein 3D's, but it just wasn't good enough for our next game. So John Carmack spent some months thinking about how more advanced the new engine should be for the game that we decided to call Doom. Based on the rapid development of our previous games, we came up with another important principle. We are our own best testing team. We should never allow anyone else to experience bugs or see the game crash. Don't waste other people's time. Test thoroughly before checking in your code. No throwing it over the fence for testers to find a bug and put it in a bug database and then someone else fixes it later. It's a super wasteful cycle. So after 1992, id Software's second stage of company development was complete, along with, of course, another principle. As soon as you see a bug, you fix it. You do not continue development. If you don't fix your bugs, new code will be built on a buggy code base and you'll have an unstable foundation. If you check in buggy code, someone's gonna be writing code based on that code. And you can just imagine how bad it could turn into. So the ideas for Doom came from our D&D campaign, which was full of demons. And we really loved the movies Evil Dead and Aliens. So Doom's design was kind of like a mashup of all these ideas. In the beginning of Doom's development, we created, a new core principle. Use a development system that is superior to your target to develop your game. So before Doom, we were making games for DOS while we're developing on DOS computers, like everyone else. We knew that we could do better if we used more powerful computers and a more advanced operating system to develop our games. So we developed Doom on Next Step workstations. They were far superior to DOS. Next Step eventually turned into OS 10 on Macs. This also meant that one of our core principles was upheld. Great tools help make great games. So we could make far better tools on Next Step. DoomEd and QuakeEd were 2 of the most important tools that we had. Like, you would never see a screen like that in DOS. It doesn't exist. So these tools they really helped us create levels and to test these levels very quickly. That's the QuakeEd there with all the textures and all the buttons and everything. So you might not have known this, but we only had 5 people on our team creating Doom. So Tom Hall left in August while making Doom, and when Tom left, we hired 2 people. We hired Sandy Peterson and we hired Dave Taylor, which brought us up to 6 people that we actually shipped Doom with. Unbelievably, while we were making Doom, we had to stop all production and create the Super Nintendo port of Wolfenstein 3D as fast as possible. So because we were starting from never having programmed a Super Nintendo before, it took us 3 weeks to make this version because we had to learn the hardware. Then we all jumped back into making Doom again. So we uploaded the shareware version of Doom to the University of Wisconsin server on December 10th, 1993. The excitement for the game was unprecedented. People were on the server creating files in the upload directory to send us messages. And the files were like when.will.we.c.doom, etc. So we got random phone calls in the office even asking when it would be out. We were wondering, how are you guys getting our phone number? So time for a quick story. During the final day of Doom's creation, we worked 30 hours. That was a long day. We had the game running on all the computers in the office to ensure that it was really solid. And on a couple of computers, the game froze. The menu could be brought up, but the gameplay itself just stopped. John Carmack thought about what could possibly be happening, and he figured out the solution without debugging. And so he fixed it. He was correct in the solution. And we basically tested the game some more. It was a 5-minute fix, and it worked. And we had basically uploaded the game. So at the beginning of 1994, I started working with Raven Software, and I developed Heretic using the Doom engine with them. I wanted to see how an inventory system in a medieval version of Doom would play, and it turned out really great. Hopefully people here remember Heretic. We also made Doom 2 in 1994. It took us 8 months, and it was released really on September 30th of 1994. And we held our release party on October 10th. So in addition to this, we did that Jaguar Doom port ourselves. Again, we were multitasking and making multiple games. We made 2 games in 1993 and 3 games in 1994. Yeah, Hexen was the sequel to Heretic. So in 1995, we started working on Quake. We had 9 developers at that time. We had 4 designers, 3 coders, 2 artists, and I was the only one to do both coding and design. I wrote Quake Ed and experimented with level design in full 3D. Again, we started with a clean code base. No code from Doom was used in Quake, which was another one of our principles of development back then. Write your code for this game only, not for some future game. You will be writing new code later because you'll be smarter. And also, you're not tying yourself down to limitations of old code. Invent new things and get used to that. Quake's engine was being developed by John Carmack, and the rasterization was by Michael Abrash. John Cash also worked on the network code, and he left id Software after Quake to become the lead programmer of World of Warcraft. Time for a quick story. So this kind of relates back to our belief that developing in a superior operating system can result in a better game. So while making Quake, we made a deal with Cray Supercomputers to buy a Cray 6400 super server for half price. Our plan was to have the entire development team connected to it to BSP and light our maps and crunch whatever new kinds of data that we will be creating with our next game's engine. The computer room in Quake's DM3 level was going to be full of Cray computers as a reference to this new hardware that we were going to acquire. Unfortunately, Cray was bought by Silicon Graphics before Quake was done, and the deal fell apart. So the computer room in Quake is filled with the usual rectangular mainframes instead of the C-shaped Cray computers. So after publishing Heretic, I started working with Raven on Hexen. I wanted to see how an FPS would play with a hub level system and character classes. Hexen launched on October 30th of 1995 during the Deathmatch 95 event that was happening at Microsoft in Redmond. A month later, I got Raven started on my next game design, which is called Hecatomb. It would be the 3rd game in the series, Heretic, Hexen, Hecatomb. But Hecatomb was never finished. It was turned into Hexen 2, and it wasn't the same game design. During this time, we noticed a small game company making some pretty decent games like Raptor Call of the Shadows, and we brought them down from Illinois to make a game that we would publish. And they called themselves Rogue Entertainment, and about 14 months later released Strife, which used the Doom engine. It was an FPS RPG, and it was really fun. Back in 1996, it showed that combining genres could actually make a really cool evolution to the FPS. Nowadays, we have Destiny and other FPS RPGs, but Strife was the very first one. Also, during 1995, we made Ultimate Doom, which was a retail version of the full version of Doom that we sold with another episode, a 4th episode. And we also made the master levels of Doom that year. So id Software at that time was still 9 developers in size. We released 2 games in 1995 while we're still working on Quake. So work continued on Quake. 14 months after we started, we released Q-Test on February 24th of 1996. And that was for the world to basically test our internet gameplay. During the next 4 months, we worked very hard to complete Quake. We also released Final Doom, which is created by Team TNT and the Casali brothers. And we released Death Kings of the Dark Citadel, which was an additional set of levels for Hexen. One important principle that helped us get Quake done faster was this one: encapsulate functionality to ensure design consistency. So examples of this in Quake would be just the torches on the walls. Like, we could have made, us level designers, place a torch model and then a fire model that animated and then a torch sound entity all at the same location. But then if we needed to move stuff around, something could have been left behind. So it was just way easier to create a torch entity that had all of that functionality built into it. Also, water in the game needed sound effect entities all over the place to fully cover the water areas, so you'd hear it everywhere. But if the water got modified in the level, we'd have to move all these sound entities all over the place and deleting them, and it would have been a big, huge mess. So it was much easier to make the game play water sounds whenever water was being rendered on the screen. So this was a renderer level feature that we put in, and it was totally out of the designer's hands. So no designer put sound entities in for the water or the sky in Quake. It ensured consistency and it saved memory. So I released Quake Shareware on June 22nd at 5:30 p.m. Central Time on the University of Wisconsin at Madison's site. Time for another quick story. While Michael Abrash was programming the renderer for Quake, he was interleaving CPU instructions with FPU instructions to calculate perspective correct texture mapping. And sometimes while he was playing the game, just for one frame, the game would show a completely different part of the map. So he isolated the only instruction where that could possibly happen, and he determined that it was impossible for it to be an invalid value. He had a friend from Intel come over and go through his analysis, and his friend agreed with him. And then his friend told him, there's a known error with the floating point divide instruction on the Pentium if you're running on an overclocked chip. So it was a hardware error. There was nothing that we could do about it, so we just left it alone. And if you want to search for it, this bug is known as the Pentium FDiv bug, FDIV bug. So Quake is the game that introduced the world to mouse look, high-speed, true 3D worlds, and internet multiplayer all in one game. We also added an in-game console for the first time, where you could use the tilde key to bring up an in-game console type commands to the game. So clans sprung up immediately, as did esports and tournaments everywhere. Quake World launched 5 months later. So making games was, and still is, our life. We love it more than anything else, as you can tell by our release of 28 games in 5.5 years by less than 10 people. Many other games were released that used our licensed technology over the years. So here's some more core principles that we learned from all this work. Try to code transparently. Tell your lead and your peers exactly how you're going to solve your current task, and get feedback and advice. Don't treat game programming like each coder is a black box. Project could totally go off the rails and cause delays. And programming is a creative art form based in logic. Every programmer is different and will code differently. Don't waste time focusing on a really rigid coding style. It's the output that matters. Thank you very much. I'm not sure if we're going to do Q&A now or if we're going to do it later.
You got them right. Yeah. We can do it now or we can do it later. I think we'll probably do a few now and then maybe come back to some later on. That would be a good way to do it. Just gives you a chance to interact as well then, because I'm conscious that otherwise it's kind of a faceless nothing for you, isn't it?
And they might forget the questions.
Yeah. There might be IDS related questions, exactly. So we've got a few here. I'm just going to look on my laptop. So let's have a look. Well, there's a few people asking about the Easter egg where you're the boss in Doom 2, which is an interesting thing. It's one of those gaming legend things, isn't it, where you've got the backwards thing, the speech.
Yeah.
There, yeah. And I think some people are just asking the story behind that and how did that happen and why did you have your head on the stick and everything in there?
Yeah, it was pretty funny. The way that happened was the artist decided that they were going to hide me in the game. When you're shooting the icon of sin at the end of the game with rockets, they would go in through this special little tunnel, and then they would hit a wall and they would damage this blue circle. It was just a circle sprite. It was just a sprite sitting there, blue circle. No one was going to ever see it, so we just left it as a blue thing, so you could see that there was actually an entity at that location in the level. What the artist, this is close to the release of the game, and the artist didn't think anyone would see it. But the problem is that I'm programming the game and making levels, and I need to program the audio for the icon of sin to take damage and to die and all that stuff. So when I was no clipping through the world and I got to the point where why would I play the game to do it? I need to test really quickly. So I'm just going to run up to my to the circle and just shoot it with a shotgun like normal. And when I was going this one time to test the hookup with the sound effects, I thought I saw my face on the screen. I was like, wait a minute, what? That's really weird. And when I went up to it, I saw that they put my head on a stake. And I was like, oh, they thought they were going to get away with this. Like the game's going to get launched and then everyone's going to find it and I'm going to be all surprised. So what I wanted to do, I'm leaving it in and I want to put my own Easter egg in that lets them know I found it. So I went to Bobby Prince immediately and I said, guess what I just found? My head's on a stake in the back of the icon of sin. So I need to put in something that when you come through the teleporter, the icon of sin sees you and then starts launching its spawn cubes. So I want the icon of sin to say something that references the fact that I know that they put my head back there. So I told Bobby, let's do this. Let's take I'm gonna say, to win the game, you must kill me, John Romero, because that's what you have to do now. Now, not to win the game, you must kill a blue dot. It's to win the game, you must kill me, John Romero. So, I said, well, I'll say that. You record it, you pitch shift it, make it backwards, reverse it, and everything, and make it sound evil. And he did that, and I hooked it up to the site for my little head back there. And so when it saw me, it would just say that. And it did sound really evil. It was awesome. I love the sound of it. And I'm like, now when it comes out, the game comes out, they're going to go, guess what? And then I'm going to go, I knew, that's why this is in there, you idiots. But the very next day, because when you're finishing a game, that team is all over it in every part of the game. And at this point, at the very end, we needed to make sure the boss level worked really well. So everybody was playing the boss level. American McGee was the first person to basically, when he came in, he gets the latest build of the game and he goes to the level and he's like, ooh, backwards scary reverse thing. And he just takes the file and he reverses it and he plays it and he tells everybody, oh, look at this. And then basically the whole thing instantly falls apart. Like everybody knows that I found out and now they know that I found out. And it was really funny. And we totally left it in because it was really funny. We have like this Easter egg. It's actually like 2 Easter eggs.
2, yeah, exactly, yeah. And it could have been an ever-escalating thing. They could have done something else. You could have...
Yeah.
Seriously.
Yep. It was great.
A never-ending escalation. This is an interesting thing. The idea of the demons in Doom, do you have a personal favourite in the Doom games? The person that's asked this question, they say, mine is the Mancubus.
Oh, I like the Cacodemon the best. Yeah, love the Cacodemon.
Excellent.
He's really mean and scary, but when you start shooting him a lot, he kind of backs off.
There's a couple of questions about the new Doom games as well. Obviously, you weren't involved in the newer Doom games. Have you? I guess it must be weird watching a franchise go off in a direction when you're not really involved in it anymore. How do you feel about those? And would you have taken them in different directions?
Yeah, those franchises have been doing that for a really long time. So when I left it was right after finishing Quake 1. Quake 2 comes out. I didn't work on that. And that was in 1997, right after I left. So I saw Quake 2. I saw Quake 3. I saw Doom 3. I saw Wolfenstein, the Enemy Territory, and Return to Castle Wolfenstein. And, so a lot of these games have been going on for years right after I left. So I'm used to seeing what they're doing with the games. And I think that the latest stuff that they've done is just really, really great. Machine Games does a really great job with the Wolfenstein series, and id's 2016 Doom and Eternal Doom are just amazing, just super hardcore. So yeah, they've done an amazing job, and I would not want to change anything that they're doing.
Some questions about the role-playing element as well. Somebody's asked, do you still play D&D? We've got a lot of students who do play, and we discussed it yesterday in the session that we had with a couple of the tabletop sort of legends that we've had in. We had Andy Chambers who did Warhammer 40,000 and Alessio Cavatori who did a lot of work on Warhammer as well. A lot of the kids play D&D. Do you still play now?
We haven't played since the pandemic, but before the pandemic, our group used to play in the office like once a week. We had 2 D&D campaigns going every week. And right now, our D&D team decided to do it virtually. So it makes it a little bit more difficult to do it virtually. But I haven't been back on it. The thing is, I've played D&D for decades. Like, I've played it so much. In fact, I play with our kids, and what I'll do is I'll just invent a new D&D campaign and just start running the kids through it. And they love it. They absolutely love it, But yeah, D&D is just a really great template for making games out of nothing.
Yeah, it's a fantastic way to spark people's imagination as well, isn't it? And, both as a player and as a DM. So that's what leads me on to another question. With Sandy Peterson being involved, obviously in those id days, and he's associated particularly with the Call of Cthulhu role-playing game. Did he bring some of that kind of Cthulhu mythos into the Doom games? Because there's always been that kind of demonic, kind of Cthulhu-esque H.P. Lovecraft vibe to Doom. Definitely, I think that's in there, isn't it?
Well, Doom was mainly demons, and that was influenced by our D&D campaign, which had a lot of demons in it, and a lot of them they were Dungeons and Dragons, like type 6 Glabro Zoo demons and stuff like that. So it had a lot of the traditional D&D demons in it. And what Sandy brought, because Sandy joined us like we were most of the way through with Doom. So when he joined, he was just trying to help finish the game. So our design had been set and everything already. But with Quake, Sandy's influence, like I had never heard of H.P. Lovecraft before Sandy. So when he got to the company and he brought the Chaosium books and gave, let me read them, I bought all of them immediately and was just like, I was blown away by H.P. Lovecraft. I couldn't believe that a world with mummies and skeletons and werewolves and Frankensteins could exist at the same time that H.P. Lovecraft's insane stuff existed. Like, it blew away that was like for babies, basically. So I was amazed. And so the influence of the H.P. Lovecraft stuff is what influenced Quake's environment and some of the story behind Quake.
Fantastic. Yeah, I mean, I think it's really interesting as well. Lovecraft, obviously, with the TV thing, the Lovecraft County thing that's been on recently, it's sort of been a resurgence again in Lovecraft as well. So it's great to see kids discovering that now. So we've got a few more. I'm just going to scroll through and find some good ones. So bear with me.
I would read Lovecraft books though. He writes really short stories, but the ideas in them are just amazing.
So we've got some people are asking about challenges that you faced. So I imagine there probably were a lot of challenges during those early years. Maybe you could sort of maybe go through a couple of those and maybe
Sure.
think about how you got through those challenges, because I think that's certainly something that's relevant to the students. They are often put off from doing things because it is a challenge, and it's nice to hear how people have got over challenges.
So yeah, the challenges that I had, there were a lot of them. Before going to to California, where I went to college, I actually grew up in the desert in Arizona. So I'm Mexican and I'm native as well. So I'm a Yaqui and a Cherokee and Mexican. And so we grew up right next to the reservation, and we didn't have, like, computers were nowhere on the horizon in Tucson. So I had no idea what I was missing until going basically to California and then like discovering them by accident when I was 11. But when I saw that you could actually program these things, and I was already addicted to arcade games, I wanted to program like really badly, but I didn't have a computer. So my challenge back then was like, I need access to this computer. So I would sneak in like all summer long to get access on there. And I was learning BASIC as fast as I could, which was great. But I used to have to go to Radio Shack because they had TRS-80s there that had BASIC on them. I used to go to like audiovisual stores that had Ataris and Commodores. And I would program on anything that they would allow me to program on. And I couldn't save anything, but I just wanted to experience just making stuff in BASIC. So finally, it was 3 years of all of this going to the computer store and typing, like hopefully the salespeople will let me on it. And just like I had no books either. So this was just like learning by poking around. And finally in Christmas of 1982, I asked my parents for 2 books, and they got me these 2 books, one of which was this Programming in 6502 book by Roger Wagner. And that was just like, that unlocked the language I needed to understand to program games at a high speed. And but there was no internet, there was no being online. This was the only book I had, or these 2 books. One was about programming games. And so it was like, that was it. It was all the material I had. So when I was learning things, even when I got to the PC, I only could use magazines and whatever books were there, because still not online, in the late 80s. So that was a lot of focus trying to just like get the information I needed. But what was really good about the time back then was like, I wasn't online, which meant that I had no notifications. I had nothing taking any of my attention away. There were no cell phones. So there was nothing to to divert my attention. The TV was never on. I was on the computer and I was focused in learning, and there was nothing that could take that away. And that was how we could make so much stuff so quickly. Because when people are probably watching the talk going, wow, you made games so fast. It's like there was nothing else that we were doing. We were only making games, and then we would eat, and then we would go to sleep. Like, it was the focus. So nowadays the challenge is turn off your notifications, stay out of the media. Don't have websites up, don't have Twitter going, don't have Instagram going. Like, turn it all off if you really want to get things done, and then turn it back on when you feel like you're finished for the day or whatever. But it takes discipline to actually get stuff done. And also, the thing to keep you moving forward is to kind of make goals for yourself. You plan on accomplishing something, and make sure that something is an easily accomplishable thing, not something huge. I want to make the biggest RPG in the world, but like, I want to make something that uses the joystick, or I want to make something that makes sound and music. And just give yourself little goals, and every little goal will build up to you knowing so much about making a game. But just make little mini goals to get yourself moving forward and accomplishing something. And whenever you feel like you've accomplished something, you feel good, it makes you want to keep going. But if you're doing stuff forever and it's breaking and not working, that's super discouraging. So if you're a coder and you're making things, don't type code for like longer than 5 minutes before you're testing it. Like, write little bits of code and run it. if you're making levels, make a little bit of a level and run it. So like when I made levels, I would only draw like maybe 5 to 10 lines on the screen, and immediately I'm running my level to see what does it feel like, what does it play like, what does it look like, and come back in. It was back and forth immediately, for hundreds and hundreds of times before that level was done. So short cycles, short iteration times on everything that you do is the way to keep yourself excited about making games.
Do you think it helped, when you first started off, you were kind of on your own, and then obviously the guys got together and you had other people that were working in a similar way? I suppose they weren't working in a similar way. You're kind of inventing ways to work really at that point, weren't you? Do you think it helped when those other people came on board in terms of focus for everybody, because you said you were focused yourself, but inevitably that focus probably would drift. If there's other people there who are involved with you and on board with you, suddenly that focus, I guess, is maximized, isn't it?
Yeah, because the other guys were exactly as focused. So Adrian, doing all the art, never talked. He was there making art, and we could see it because we all had our screens kind of facing. If you just look, you could just see who's doing what. John Carmack is like right next to me. He's sitting there coding. He's not talking all day long. He is working, like he's making stuff. And similarly, both Tom and I will, Tom is inventing stuff. We'll talk back and forth about some things. You have to talk to like, hey, Adrian, what do you think about this character? And then Adrian's like, yeah, I could do that. So it wasn't like we were sitting there talking all day. We would talk when we needed to, but most of the time it was just making stuff. It was just creation, all four of us in the same room, making things, and like it was super focused. And that's the only way that we could get it done really fast. So it was like we used our team in a maximal way, like in an optimum way, where we were all focused simultaneously. It wasn't one person who was chatty. It was like we were all making stuff. And that's why it worked so well, because we all were excited about what we were doing. And we could see results pretty quickly because John would say, all right, I got the character jumping around. And then we come over and look, and it's like, oh, that's awesome. Or we don't even need to get up. We just turn because we're all in this, small room. And so that like kept everybody excited because people were seeing results constantly. And after 2 months of seeing a ton of results constantly all day long, you got a game done.
And I suppose it helped being in that small space as well, which in those days things were. Now things tend to be much wider and open plan offices, and it's not so intimate, is it? So I've got some questions about the soundtrack, which is good, because I love music. That's one of my things as well, and certainly that's one of the things that drew me to your games initially as id. So soundtracks have obviously played an important part in all your games, really, and a lot of them are iconic. I still get shivers down my spine when I hear that little sort of baby crying sound in the Doom games. It's sort of like a real distant kind of.
Oh, that was in PlayStation.
Yeah, on the PlayStation version. Whoa, it was horrible. But I, particularly with Quake, when Nine Inch Nails obviously got involved on the soundtrack for that one, I'm just interested to know how that came about. And obviously, I think it's a pivotal moment probably for Trent, because that's kind of what he does now more than the normal sort of Nine Inch Nails music.
Yeah.
So maybe you could give us a bit of insight into that.
Yeah, music has always been extremely important to me. A third of your game is music, basically. Like that experience that people are having with your game, a third of it is music and sound effects. So I think it's super important to get that stuff in a game as fast as possible. If you want to get excited about a game that you're making right now, start putting audio in it right now. And it will make the game come to life. It will feel like it's not this weird prototype thing, but you're on the road to something. And so the audio being so important to me makes me really focus a lot on it. And with Doom, even with Commander Keen, the second set of Commander Keens, we could actually have some music in finally after our first games. We made a lot of games that didn't have music because the technology just wasn't there yet. MIDI music was something that was just barely emerging in 1990. So it was something that we had to kind of get used to after, maybe a year, because our games were so short at that time. But we eventually started putting music in our games, and Wolfenstein, Commander Keen was the first time that we actually had like a whole game with a full sound track. And that was Bobby Prince. And he was a lawyer who always loved music. So then he taught himself how to make music and started making computer music, and jazz was his specialty. So there was a lot of jazz in the Commander Keen games. And then with Wolfenstein, he knew exactly what he needed. There was a lot of jazz in Wolfenstein, actually. But what I did was I would direct Bobby and basically say, I need this many songs. I need a song that's specifically like this, and he would make all that stuff, and I'm going to program it all in the game. He would make the sound effects. We would help him, like our voices are in the games, and we would, then I'm connecting that stuff up in the code. With Doom, it was the same thing. I'm like, here's a whole bunch of metal songs. I want some stuff that's like this sound, and so he made a lot of heavy metal style MIDI music. And with the audio, I would tell them I need audio for this many characters, and they need to sound like this, and then they wander around, and there should be a wandering sound, and all of those things. Program them all in, and the game just sounds really great because Bobby was really, really good. And then with Quake, we decided like we're gonna go full MP3 soundtrack type stuff. While we were making Quake, we were actually using streaming MP3s off of our network. There were a bunch of ambient tracks that Trent Reznor had a friend of his send to us that his friend made. So we were making Quake mostly with some other soundtrack before Trent made his. And the way that way that we got connected to Trent was that Hollywood was knocking on the doors of a lot of popular game developers and publishers back then in the 90s, trying to figure out how could Hollywood work with the game industry. There's got to be a way for both industries to make money together. So we decided that we would get a Hollywood agent, and ICM was the company that we worked with. CAA is another one. And we had our agent there. His name is Bill Block, and Bill Block represented a lot of acts. And one of them was Nine Inch Nails. And when he was talking to Trent was talking about Doom and, that he loved the game. And we thought, hey, why don't we hook up with Trent and see if he would make music for Quake? Like we were already making Quake. So Trent was super excited about it because Nine Inch Nails used to have a 4-player LAN on the tour bus. So when they're done with the concert, they get on the tour bus and they deathmatch. And they love to do that. And so it was one of the really big games for them, Chris Brenda and Trent and the other guys. So basically, we just made an appointment for them to come over, and Trent came in a big limo, from DFW airport. And for some reason, all these girls are downstairs. Like somehow they're tracking. I don't know how they know, but they know where he's going. And so they're just like waiting for him to get out of his car. And it was great, but we had a really good time talking to Trent and telling them what we needed for the game, what the mood of the game is, and all that kind of stuff. So it ended up, being really, really fun working with him, and he did a really good job.
Did he do the sound effects as well? I know he did the soundtrack. Did he do all the sort of the different?
He did all the sounds of the player, so all of the grunts and jumps and cracks and stuff like that. And the rest of the sound effects was basically American and I split the sound effects, creating the different sounds. So like when you pick up a 100 health, you pick up any health or, any of the items that you pick up, I made all those sound effects, the teleporters, all that stuff. So I did tons of the sound in the game. And since then I've been doing massive amounts of sound for all of our games. Like we just released Empire of Sin, and the music is, I did all the audio in the game. So I've had 3 composers and some sound effects engineers, and I programmed all of it into the game. And Sigil was a Doom add-on that I created last year. And I talked to Buckethead about making the soundtrack for it because he's like this incredible guitarist, and he was excited about it. He loved Doom. He played the hell out of Doom. He really wanted to make music for it. So he did a great job, and I put all that. Basically, when you play Doom now, when you play with Sigil, you're hearing actual Buckethead music while you're playing the level, and I made the levels to those tracks, so they're made for those songs. But yeah, the soundtrack for Sigil is really great. You can hear it on YouTube. You can actually buy it on Buckethead's site, and still working with them.
Yeah, I'm going to mention Sigil a little bit later. We've got a few questions about that as well, but I thought we'll come to those later on. I think we're probably around about time for Brenda to do the switcheroo. There we go. Hello, Brenda. And we'll let you go on, and then there'll be time for some more Q&As. We've got loads of questions coming in as well, still loads to get through. So
all right, thanks.
We'll come back to some more, I'm sure, later on. Thank you, John, for that. And over to Brenda.
Okay, so now it's my turn to share my screen. Let's see. Okay. All right, am I all good? Is everything looking all right and how we expect it to look?
We can see your presenter view at the moment, so you need to pop it
Okay.
into full screen, I think.
That's bizarre. Okay, give me one sec. How odd, because we had just set this up. Well, this is how software works. So bear with us for a minute. Bear with me for a second. Hey, John, is he still there? Oh my goodness, I bet he got up to get a glass of water. Okay, well, I was going to have him. John, do you mind just answering a few questions while I get myself tech sorted?
I'll find some more questions, yeah.
Yeah, hang on one second. Okay. Have him answer.
I was here the whole time.
Were you? Sorry.
Yeah, it was. I was.
Okay.
I was waiting for you to. I was waiting for you to do your thing.
I'm trying to do my thing.
Should we? This is a good one from Leo Cooper.
Yeah.
What do you think were the key ideas that Quake revolutionized for modern day first-person shooter titles?
Well, definitely mouse looking in games is huge. Like all games now use the mouse to look around, and Quake was the first game to do that. So that was really big. Multiplayer over the internet, that was massive. Those were probably the two biggest things, other than actually playing in a true 3D engine that was texture mapped and high speed. Before that, nothing was that fast, and nothing was really true 3D before that. So those three things were pretty huge.
I can think of another one as well. As a player, quite obsessive player of Quake at the time, the rocket jump was vitally important in Quake.
Yeah, and that was an accident.
Yeah.
How am I looking now?
Jumps. It's working now,
yeah.
Brenda. We're all
Looks good.
Yeah.
Perfect. All righty.
Okay, so back to Brenda.
Okay, or I can just answer John's questions. I probably at this point in time know most of the answers, and I know answers to the questions people won't dare to ask. All right, so let me just jump into this. Like, one of the things is when Confetti asked me to speak, I thought, what am I going to talk about? Because I've been in games as long as John has, so about 40 years now, believe it or not. Got in when I was really young. I'm not 90 years old at this point. I may look it, but that's only because I'm tired today. So I just thought, you know what, I'm going to tell the story of games, and I'm going to talk about the story from my perspective, from your perspective as players, about where we come up with ideas, about some jobs in the game industry, and then there'll be loads of times for questions after the fact. Okay. So let me just jump right into this. So what is the story of games? And I'm going to talk about, as I mentioned, what's my story. So when we're thinking about how do people even get into the industry, how did that even happen? And then when we are talking about your story, it's critically important, as I know you're all aspiring game developers, especially those of you working on tabletop games, which I've done a fair bit of as well. It's critically important that we think about the audience in relation to games. And then the story of games themselves, like how long have they been around? And one thing I would think of is like, just take a guess at when you think the first video game, what's credited to be the first video game, shows up. See if you have an idea of what year that might be. And then we'll talk about what stories games tell. And then what experiences do games offer, and what experiences don't they offer that maybe they should? And then, as we already mentioned, there'll be loads of time for Q&A. Okay, so let's just jump into this and find out what the hell my story is. So first and foremost, I am a game designer or a game director at this point in time. And when I bring this up, I usually get one of three questions, and they are these. So first, the first question I get is, did I make any number of games? Very often it's Fortnite. And in fact, obviously, I did not make Fortnite. So the next one is, did I make Minecraft? And no, I didn't make Minecraft. And more recently, did I make Valheim? No, I didn't. But we've sure lost a whole lot of hours in our house to Valheim. So if I had made any of these games, I would obviously be sitting on a pile of cash, roughly the size of the island of Ireland. But the game industry, as you guys probably know, is a pretty small place. So that means that we do know the people who created those games. And it's one of my favorite things about the game industry, actually, is that it is small and there's an opportunity for people to get to know one another and to get to know other game creators or game programmers or developers or artists, however you want to say it. And so some of the games that I've just mentioned there, particularly Minecraft and Valheim, and we could say Doom as well, come from small teams. And so it shows that just a few people with a really good idea can become ridiculously successful in this industry. So another question I get is, do I spend all day playing games? And well, yeah, I kind of actually do. So the good news about game developers is we need to play games. Except like I thought I'd have a book here, but somehow I don't. I don't know what I did with it. But one of the things as a game developer, I don't play games just as a player. I play games to figure out what's fun and why I'm interested in that. So recently, I've put a bunch of hours into Hades because I think I'm really enjoying it and I think it's great. And I play probably, I don't know, roughly, depending on what I'm working on, maybe 100 to 200 games a year. As you can tell with that rate, I don't necessarily finish every game that I play, but I try a whole lot of games. So recently I've been playing a lot of Hades, Sea of Thieves, Ghost Recon Breakpoint, which I think is a beautiful game. And then also I spend a fair bit of time checking out mobile games like, say, Candy Crush. And sometimes, and this is just one of the things I find bothersome, is when sometimes people go, oh, that's not a real game. Like, look, man, it's made 1.5 billion in its life cycle. That's a real game no matter which way you put it. And games are incredibly broad. Everything from tabletop games. In fact, since I know we have a bunch of tabletop people here, I'm not sure that you were aware, but initially when computer games started showing up, the hardcore tabletop game designers would go, that's not a game. It's not a real game. You can't have games on computers. Games aren't tabletops. And so this tends to be an argument that resurfaces every once in a while. And then I've also played a fair bit of Fall Guys, which is just a huge breakout hit. And while some of you may be thinking, like, this is obviously the perfect job for me, and where do I sign to play games all day? And I will say it is kind of the perfect job. I really love what I do. Making games is really fun. I also spend a lot of time thinking about a game critically. Why was it fun? What did I like about the game? What's it doing that no other game has done before? And some of the ways that I do that, I'll actually set a reminder on my phone to go off in 20 minutes. And when my phone goes off, I write down every single thing that my brain is thinking about, like what is keeping my brain busy, because that's the sort of stuff that's important to game developers and important to keeping the game fun. So I spend a lot of my time, as you might imagine, playing my own game and trying to get my own game polished and fun and ready for prime time. And so here you're seeing, this is Empire of Sin running in the game editor. We use Unity for this specific game. And so what it ends up meaning is that my games are, as a game designer, game director, I spend a lot of time playing unfinished games. And it's kind of like spending your day playing with broken toys. And once they're fixed and fun and out the door, then I'm back to the drawing board and working on, either like a DLC for that game or on, in fact, the next game. So the next question I get is, what does a game designer even really do? And many people, I know that there's a lot of people in the game industry who are curious about coming into games, but depending on who they've connected with, they may find out the game designer may be a programmer, they might be doing art. And there's sometimes in the game industry, because we're young enough, our terms for what job does what tend to be different company to company. So first and foremost, for me, a game director is is we create virtual worlds and experiences for our players, and whether that's a sci-fi setting or an iconic character, and basically we create the worlds that players play in. So I often compare my job to that of an architect, drawing plans. From these plans, the architect will make a house, and from my plans, which don't look nearly as good as an architect's plans, what? I'm just getting a very interesting note saying that I'm stuck on slide 1. Is anybody, are you seeing these slides forward?
Can only see slide 1.
Oh my goodness. Well, that's fascinating. All right, so this is, John and I are using like basically the same machine. Okay, give me a second. I'm going to stop sharing. So I'll be able to start on the exact same slide. Give me one sec here. All right, close. Here we are. Okay, so, all right, let me just get this sorted. I was wondering about it. Help her, John. Listen, I'm an avatar. I can help myself. All right, that's really puzzling why it's doing that. Because so what you guys may find odd to believe, we've actually tested this and it was working just fine. What slide do you guys happen to be seeing now? It's not even up. Okay. Yeah, the share, yeah. You know what I'm going to do? I'm going to do this. I think this will work instead of the other one. All right, let's see how this comes. Now, what are you seeing?
That's it. Yeah, that's the
Is it moving?
of the house. It's working. It's working.
Oh,
yes.
Lord. Okay.
Hurrah.
Well, just a case in point, when Zoom says share the presentation, it's not actually going to forward the presentation. Okay. Anyway, I hope you enjoyed looking at that same slide for the last 6 minutes. My apologies about that. You haven't missed a ton of stuff. This is actually the only game-specific thing I've seen, and I'm sure you don't want to hear me say roughly the same stuff again. So when an architect draws his plans or her plans, you would see something like that. So for me, this is actually a design doc I drew up for Wizardry 8, and my plans look like this. They don't look nearly as good as an architect's plans, say, but from these plans, people will actually build a level. So basically, the programmers come in and they act like the construction workers to put the house together, and then the artists will act as interior designers to make it beautiful and an attractive place to be. Except the problem with that, now we've got the programmers and we've had the artists, and we could even have the audio guys in at this point in time. But the problem is there's nothing happening here, right? This is not interesting. It's not exciting. But let's just imagine that I said around that corner is 5,000 pounds. Now, okay, now that becomes interesting, but it's not interesting unless I just add something to it. So there's you and 3 other people, and around that corner, there's 5,000 pounds. Okay, now there's competition and you're figuring out how you're going to knock those 2 people out. Around the corner, there are 3 other people in 5,000 pounds. And so you can see even these really small additions, I'm changing the mental shape of that space and the possibility space. And so in essence, game designers are really experienced planners, and we're trying to give you something to do. And so what's going to happen inside this house versus this one or this one or this one? So each one of these suggests a distinctly different experience. And if we think about Minecraft for a minute, like the designer of this game had to answer some specific questions like, how do you walk? And what happens when you hit a tree? And what happens at night? And we take something like this when we bring it to Monopoly, and basically game designers write the rules of play. In this case, collect 200 pounds when you go past go. And once we figure out what the rules are going to be, we need to teach the player about those rules through the process of play. And so in a nutshell, game designers create worlds, we create the goals, we create the challenges, we create the stories, and we're creating the experience for players. And whether that is, say, a zombie apocalypse or saving the castle and defending the kingdom, For me, I got into the tech industry when I was 15 in 1981, and I well remember the genuine magic of computers. I'm about as hardcore nerd as you can possibly get. But I actually start making games even earlier. So that's me. I'm 5, and that's how old I was when I started making games, believe it or not. In my family, we were a low income family, and so my mom, she would take me to boot sales or garage sales or whatever you want to call them, and off we would go to these sales, and we scrimped and saved, but my mom would give me a dime, and with that dime I could do anything I wanted. I could get anything I wanted, but as you can imagine, like, it's a dime, right? I'm not going to get too much. But I loved board games. I absolutely loved them. And so I would find these board games that were often missing a piece, and I didn't particularly care. And so I would just get those games and I'd buy them, and then I would take all the pieces and parts and I'd make my own board games out of them. And in fact, I remember that, like, maybe my 10th or 11th birthday, a friend gave me a brand new Monopoly game. And I was so excited. I took the box off, took the top off. I took the board, I flipped it over, and I couldn't wait to make my own games. And so I said, "What do you want me to make?" And my friends looked at me like I was from Mars, probably, because nobody flips a Monopoly board over to start drawing on the back of it, but I did. And then something happened the following year that fundamentally changed my entire life. My mother, probably from a boot sale, came home with this: the original white box of Dungeons and Dragons, which I still have. It is not nearly in this condition. It was carried in backpacks. It went over land. It probably went in water. God knows what happened to it, but I still have it. And it is impossible to understate the effect of this game on me. I could create worlds. It was like a rule set for my imagination. Literally anything I could dream of, this was a framework for it. And I think that's why when Stranger Things came out, I was so incredibly excited about it, because I was awkward, I was unpopular. All of these kids felt like me, and they were going on the adventures that I wanted to go on. So fast forward to when I'm 14 and I pick up a series called Roll Master. And I didn't like the way that it calculated encumbrance. So I decided to recreate the formula. And any coders in the audience will know that when you do something like this, it means you rewrite the entire system. So I played it for a couple years. I wish I still had it. I'm sure it was like absolutely terrible, but I was really proud of it at the time. So in 1981, I meet another female game developer, and this is just about being at the right place at the right time. The right place happened to be the high school bathroom, unbelievably, of where I went to school, the Ogdensburg Free Academy. She came in and she was looking for a cigarette, and I happen to smoke. I don't advocate smoking for any reason, including getting into the game industry. So I gave her one, and to be polite, she struck up a conversation, and she said, "Do you have a job?" No. Had I ever heard of Surtec? No, I hadn't. Had I ever heard of Wizardry? Nope. But had I ever heard of D&D? And oh my God, yes, I had. I was a dungeon master. And that's how I got my job. It was really, honestly, that pathetically simple. So this is the first game that I worked on. I know graphically it's shocking, but in 1981, this was state of the art. And if you've never heard of Wizardry, Wizardry was the original CRPG that ultimately leads to JRPGs. So if you're a fan of Final Fantasy, it draws a line direct back to this game. And my mom was really proud of me, to get a job at Surtec. As I mentioned, we had very little money, but there I had access to computers and I fell headfirst into technology. If I had to do it more than twice, I would code it. And for me, coding was more fun than Legos. I felt I could build anything with it. In the game industry is also where I met my first husband, the Apple II. It's also where I met my second husband, who you talked with earlier. And so we made a load of games during those years, and I actually managed to put myself through college working on games and in technology. And so I have unbelievably been here almost 40 years. It'll be 40 years in October. And that's surprising to me, but it's also wonderful. It means I will have done nothing else in my life except been a game developer or having talked about games while working in colleges. And so I've seen everything from single player to multiplayer. I've seen arcades rise and I've seen them go away, and I've spent more quarters than I can care to imagine. I've also seen, which was incredibly cool, the birth of consoles and the PlayStation and Nintendo Entertainment System. And I've seen consoles go from, back where they were in the mid 90s all the way up till today. And I've also been fortunate that at this point, I've worked on nearly 50 games, everything from Wizardry 1, which I mentioned earlier, to titles in the Dungeons and Dragons series, Def Jam Ghost Recon. I've worked on social games, mobile games, and I've worked on most recently Empire of Sin, which is on all the consoles, including the current, the next generation of PS5 and Xbox Series X. And so when I first got started in games, though, they were a hobby. Games were considered a hobby, and people called them a fad. And I remember coming out of college and thinking that I needed to get a real job, whatever that was. And it never occurred to me that I already had one. So we had an interview with IBM, and they said to me, so your job would be revising DOS manuals. And I thought, oh, geez, no, like, I don't even, like, if you don't know what DOS is, you don't know. It's DOS is really close to falling asleep. And so there's no way I wanted to do that. And so I came back from that interview, and I told my boss at Surtech, I'm like, I think I just want to keep making games. And today, as you all know, games are a huge market, and they're the most popular form of culture among our youth, and they generate more money at this point than film, TV, movies, books, and radio all combined. And if you're thinking, like, I know a lot of you are already in a course, that you might like a career in games and to continue to go forward with that, it's also good to know that jobs in the game industry tend to pay quite well. Starting salaries and going up from there. And there's another part of my story, but I will come back to that later. So let's consider, like, what's your story? So there's a huge range of gamers out there, as we all know. And when I talk to people, inevitably they'll tell me that either they play a ton of games or that they play no games at all whatsoever. Sometimes they'll say their last game was Pong, or they haven't played a game since 1993 Doom, or that they really are just into mobile devices and they don't have time to say, like, okay, it's Saturday morning and I'm sitting here playing games till Saturday night. They just want to play games for 15 minutes at a time, which is obviously fine. And I also find that the demographics have shifted while the perception necessarily hasn't. So if I ask somebody, like, who do they think the traditional gamer is, it's often like the 17-year-old boy in his parents' basement or like in a garage. And that's actually not the case, right? Like the biggest demographic for games is 18 to 34-year-old, and then 34 to 54 years. And under 18 is actually a smaller percentage of games. And also another thing we tend to think, if we just go back to that boy in his parents' basement or garage or whatever, actually, of people who own consoles, women actually own the most consoles, and Hispanic people play the most games. And so, which is actually maybe explains our household and why we have so many consoles in it and why we play so many games, given the combination of me and John. And one of the things that I think that's been incredibly cool, I would say in the last 10 years, is just the rise of these ancillary professions around games. Like streaming has come up huge. Even modders, like the mod community, obviously set off by John's games. Modding community is creating their own content, in some cases actually selling that content. And then esports teams, we all know they have become a standard part of the sports scene. I was incredibly grateful for League of Legends. This is obviously pre-COVID times. But when people would say, like, yeah, well, games aren't a real sport, it's hard to look at that picture and argue with esports not being real when it's filling stadiums. And games have also had a pretty fantastic effect externally. Like if you are a fan, if you have an iPhone, or you even have a phone that was designed like the original iPhone, there's a direct lineage actually to the arcades. So Steve Wozniak actually meets Steve Jobs at Atari. If you've ever used Reddit, that started because of Quake. And there's a long, long list of people who were hardcore game fans, and that passes up to us today. So what's the story of games? So some of our very earliest games go way back. For instance, one of the things that's interesting is once human beings got survival out of the way, they weren't worried about dying in the next second, two forms of culture automatically start to happen. The first one, well, three forms of culture. The first one is art. and then music, even including tapping on the desk. But the next one that happens is games. And the game that you're looking at here in Queen Nefertiti's tomb is this. So it's a game called Senate. Now, unfortunately, no rule sets survive. But this is considered to be one of the very earliest games. And the games in Native American culture also date back this far. And as far as video games go, I love to, if we were live, I would ask people, give me a guess. And when you think, if I could see the chat box, which I can't see, when you think the earliest video game came out, and I'll show you. So here it is. And this is a game called Tennis for Two. It was a game. It was a multiplayer game. It was at the Brookhaven in the National Labs in Long Island in New York. And a guy named Willie Higginbottom, he creates this game, and it's commonly regarded as the first video game. Now, of course, when we get into the 70s and 80s, we start to see home consoles. And many of us from that time have memories of just sitting on floors playing games for hours. But the huge game changer, and that's a weird word to use here, but the Apple computer, I cannot overstate its importance to the game industry. When the Apple computer comes out, there's a Cambrian explosion basically of games. So many new genres were invented at that time. And it really turned game development over to hobbyists. Now, mind you, they were pretty privileged hobbyists because a machine like this would have been $4,000 or $5,000 at that point in time. But it means people could create games at home, and loads of games are created, like games that even defy genres. But if you love games like Doom or Call of Duty or Final Fantasy or The Sims, and I could go on, all of these games draw their roots direct back to this computer. And the PC market obviously continues to grow to this very day, and it's same for the console market, and we've come a long way since then. And I would say VR is our latest thing, and the hopes that it will take people to places they've never seen before. And to me, VR's most exciting applications are actually in health games, which I'm going to talk about in a bit. So how do games tell stories? Well, there's two ways, I think. There's obviously the game. The game has a story in it that somebody wanted to tell. And so if we consider games like, say, The Last of Us Part 2, there's a pre-created story that the player plays through. The player has some agency in that, or sometimes the stories are written earlier. Like, say, The Witcher, this is actually a tale that a writer wanted to tell, and some game designers thought, this is pretty great. We'd like to put this into game form and let people live in that world. But there's another type of game, another type of story that only games can do, and that is the player's story. So if we just for a sec forget about video games and we just go to board games, like there's no story of Monopoly. Like Monopoly, you don't open it and you hear this tale of something. But every Monopoly game has a story. In everybody's house, there is the person they hate playing against. There is a person who will never give up. There's somebody that they remember as the person who cheats. Maybe there's two people who get together and always team up against another person. And that's our story of Monopoly. And that's the coolest thing about games. And you can see, the same thing, especially if you play Dungeons and Dragons, like you could get a module that had a story, but the funnest things that happen in Dungeons and Dragons are emergent. And games are the only form of art, the only media that allow that. I mean, these are things designers take into account, obviously, while designing a game. And to me, that's the coolest thing about them. Because like if you go to a movie, like you're going there to take in whatever experience that they want to give to you, and you just sit there and you watch it and you might talk about it after. Whereas a game, right, like this is a canvas and you can create whatever experience that you want within the world that's been created for you. And that makes games truly unique. And I would even go a step further that nowadays, as game developers, we're actually thinking about streamers and how streamers are going to create content in our worlds and how the content that they're going to create can be engaged with. And this is stuff that we need to think about. So game designers, obviously, we take this into account. And I'll give you an idea, a bit behind the scenes of how we might do something like this. So level designers create the level by level play in a game. And we take into account all of this, the flow, what you have to move around, what are the patrol routes, what are the puzzles people have to get around. And that's the sort of stuff we're thinking about. And sometimes level designers will actually lay this out on paper. So here is, this is from Quake in 1996 by some guy I know. It's E2M3. I think it's the Crypt of Decay, actually. And so this is published by id Software. But here's John's, his hand-drawn level layout. And there you can see the actual level as designed. And we also use environments to tell the story. So environments can make players nervous, and they can do a lot of heavy lifting so that we don't have to write this, right? Like, they make us nervous, and in this case, they can make us nervous, but also excited to see what's there, or it can give us a sense of wonder and scale, or it can give us a sense of time, and particularly real world time and place, thus automatically giving us, telling us at least what the expected rules of the world are, without the game having to explicitly tell us. I'm sure all of you are familiar with content designers, or narrative designers, as they're sometimes called. The thing I think is fantastic about games is that there's so much content in a game. In some cases, like in my game, there's more content by a factor of 3 in the game, written text, than there is in the most recent book that I read. So it's the opportunities for writers in games are rather huge. And what do? Well, a sample quest might be something like this. So find the ruby wizard, give her 10 rubies, get the diamond, and bring the diamond to the pirate. Now, obviously, and then we'll get the pirate's treasure. This is an absolutely terrible quest. This is a good quest, right? So if you have ideas for quests, or you have things that you think you would like to do in a world, the example I showed you is a template. But the content, a good quality content, makes the difference. And so game designers, in a nutshell, we dream up these worlds. At least I try to. And we create goals for our player and challenges for them to encounter as they solve those goals. So we create these experiences through the process of game design. We determine, one of the things that's critical is how is the game won? How does it behave? And we write this story to determine the nitty-gritty of all the information that's displayed on the screen. And obviously, if anybody has any questions about jobs in the industry, John and I will be happy to answer them after the fact. So the next question I often get asked this is, where do ideas for games come from? And if you're thinking about games as a career, it's important to take a look outside the screen, because in many cases, that's where those ideas come from. So if I look at this, so this is a picture from my latest game, and down there in the lower left-hand corner, you can see Mr. Daniel McKee Jackson. So my game is based in 1920s Prohibition era Chicago. Everything you are looking at in this screen comes from research into that time, including Daniel McKee Jackson. So Daniel McKee Jackson was a very upstanding citizen. He was a friend of the mayor. He was the last person you would ever expect of being a boss, right? Like running Prohibition era rackets, but he did. He owned a funeral parlor, which I would be nervous crossing somebody who had the ability to bury me. But it's this character, all of the stuff that's in the game, all of his stories, and not just him, it's like all the bosses come straight out of history books. So that's a great place to find stuff. Other times, people use life experience. So a great example of this is a 5-minute game by Anna Antropy. It tells a 5-minute story of her life, and it's received a load of accolades, including being nominated for an IGF award. There's a game that I regularly talk about. This game, I think it's an absolute work of art. It's called That Dragon Cancer, which is about a family's struggles with cancer and their subsequent struggles with their faith. Absolutely beautiful game, difficult game, but it ended up winning a much-deserved BAFTA. There's also yet another 5-minute game. This is a game called Passage, which is just about being in a relationship and the dynamics of what that means. Another game that I think is fantastic. So this is a game called Papa and Yo, and this is by Vander Caballero. And this game is about his father's struggles with alcoholism. And this is not unique to him, but he was the first to make a game about it. And then Shigeru Miyamoto actually often uses his childhood experiences and puts these into his games. Like he talks about there being a lake that was at his grandparents' house, or caves that were at his grandparents' house. And he said he looked out on this lake and that really inspired him and he put it into the game. Now, as an adult, he sees the lake as a small pond, but when he was a kid, it was hugely vast, right? And we see that sort of stuff showing up in his games. And other times, people are expanding the possibility space of games and what they can cover. So Leah and the Shadows of War was a release a few years ago, but it was about children in a war-torn country and their father's efforts to get his daughter to survival. We see something similar in this War of Mine. It's an excellent game that challenges players to survive and sort of puts you in these ethical quandaries. Another game that I've enjoyed, which is kind of like a digital book, Subsurface Circular. It's basically a game about robots stuck on the London Underground. This was written by Mike Bithell of Bithell Games. Fantastic game. Yeah, I encourage you to check it out. And another one, so Binding of Isaac. I'm a huge fan of Ed McMillan's work, and most of Ed's work is in some way, shape, or form somewhat autobiographical. So if you have something unique in your life, that's something that I would absolutely mine for game ideas. In my case with Empire of Sin, I grew up on the Canadian border, and there was a bar in my town that never shut during Prohibition. And that bar ended up being a fascination of mine. And my mother didn't want to give me a straight answer about, cops looking the other way. I guess she thought I would go bad, or who knows what she thought. But the end result was that she set up a lifelong fascination on criminal empires, and it ended up resulting in that game. So what experiences do games offer? Well, at this point, I feel like we're good at showing a range of human emotions. For instance, we're exceptionally good at expressing fear. Thanks to VR, I would say we are even more successful in expressing fear. We're also good at celebrating joy, the gaining of levels and things like that. We're really good at doing that in games. Increasingly, we are becoming good at sadness and taking a look at more difficult subject matter. Games are also doing interesting things like challenging us. So this is the no Russian scene from Modern Warfare. If you're not familiar with it, the nutshell is when you leave this elevator, it says, remember, no Russians. It doesn't want you to shoot anybody, and you don't have to actually. But there's even been academic papers written about the dynamics of this specific scene. So it's about challenging us, really. And so there's also wonder. I know in many video games, when I first get into them, like probably Last of Us was the game that most recently did this to me. It's just Last of Us 2 was just like, wow, that is just so incredibly beautiful. Or Ghost Recon Breakpoint. We're exceptionally good at rage, and we're also good at pride, like building things that we care about and we think are nice. And so games are really good at that. Now, I'll tell you, I'm often asked about like what is a growth area for games. Obviously, the AAA industry is going fine. The III industry is going fine. But where else are we really growing? And one of the areas that we're growing is beyond just health, beyond just fun and entertainment. So game designers have turned their skills toward a broad variety of topics. And this is a specific game that's designed to teach people to relax. And this is becoming a pretty big area. So, and you may have played this game, in fact. So in 2018, Brie Coach comes out with a game called Self-Care. It's Pound Self-Care, in case you're looking for it. And the game is basically about staying in bed all day because you are completely worn out. And as a mother of four and a CEO, I can sort of relate to that. Year over year from 2018 until 2019, self-care apps, self-care games grew by 40%. It was absolutely massive growth in this area. And we also had fitness games. So these probably go back to the Wii Fit. And the Wii Fit had a certain degree of success, but this fitness stuff really took off with another app, and this was the app. Not intended to be a fitness app, but when it comes out in July 2016, it was an instant phenomena, and people were walking and walking for miles and miles and miles. And so like there were actually like sort of flash mobs where people, like swarms of people, to chase these rare creatures. And then there was actually a whole walk that was organized. And so exercise wasn't, interestingly enough, a necessary game mechanic, but it required it to be fun and successful. And interestingly enough, Stanford and Microsoft did a research study. And they found that people were getting 26% more exercise than they were before they were playing the game. And so there's other combinations like Garfield, if you remember that comic book character. So this was a game about, he's known for his love of junk food. And so they actually created a game about that. In the Netherlands, health insurance agency actually got involved and thought this prevention is a pretty good thing. And they also worked with scientists at another university to actually see how games could influence nutrition and behavior, obesity, and lifestyles. Relive, is a game that came out in 2014. So this game is a collaboration between researchers and for the Italian Research Council and Studio Evil in Italy. And it was about teaching teenagers how to recognize heart attacks. So then when we're talking about prevention, one of the things that people are always trying to prevent is sexually transmitted diseases. So the Swiss government thought, what could we do that people would talk about and share with their friends? And they came up with an idea that not only do people talk about it, they shared the hell out of it with their friends, and it was Catch the Sperm. So Catch the Sperm basically fires condoms to catch these sperm, and this was part of their Stop AIDS campaign. It spawned multiple sequels. It was so popular, it came out in English, German, and Japanese. It even had a Christmas edition. And it's kind of like nearly possible not to snicker at these cute graphics and its funny name. But this was a really successful game. And without these graphics, without the sort of the fun it still had a serious message behind it. It was really successful. Another thing, some of the areas that I think are really cool is what's happening in rehabilitation. So what you're looking at here, this is the Karen Lab, and it was at the Walter Reed Military Hospital. And it was designed to help rehabilitate amputees, but it really wasn't getting a lot of use. So a game designer came in and said, I think I know what I can do. And when the game designer actually took over and created this virtual space, suddenly it did start getting a lot of use, and it was great for the patients involved. Along the same lines, there's a product that came out in 2015 called Vera, and it was a game-like simulation by a health company that used motion tracking for physical therapy. And now this is a very small sample set. This is only 8 people, but this used VR along with like this exoskeleton that you're looking at back there. And so that's Miguel Niquilas. And so basically patients who were put in that who had a full spinal cord injury, they could not walk. But using this and being put into a virtual environment and having their limbs moved, they actually showed a small but non-trivial sensation and muscle control in their lower limbs. So this is super early, tiny set, but still really exciting. And actually, there are at least 2 places, one here at the University of Utah, you're seeing there's at least 2 places that I know of that a game lab is now part of the School of Medicine. And so it's getting further and further. And not only to treat anxiety, but to even to treat ADHD and to improve memory levels through 30 minutes of video game play a day. There's also Magic Table, which helps dementia patients relax and reminisce. And some studies, this is pretty wild, some studies have showed that playing Bejeweled is as effective as a low dose of Xanax. People are using games and VR to treat cancer and to lower patients' anxiety levels. And then this, I think, is super cool. This is probably one of my favorite health apps that has been developed. So graphically, no, it's not that exciting. But the interesting thing about Snow World is they're using this VR. They're using it in VR for patients who are burn victims. And so they found Snow World actually worked better than morphine. So that's pretty incredible, particularly when you think about the addictive potential of those drugs. So doctors are also using there's surgical training tools. Time actually gave one of the best inventions in 2019. This specific one is actually multiplayer, believe it or not. And so this is a hugely growing area. And as you're heading out there into careers in the game industry, give it some thought, because this is not the first stop for many people, but it is one that can really impact a lot of lives. And so we've also, there's advocates like Jane McGonigal. She wrote a book called Super Better, and she's long talked about the benefits of games. So what experiences don't games offer? So I said I was going to come back to this. And so this is how my story relates to this. So if you Google game protagonist, this is the first half of the images that you get. And this is the second half of the images you get. So kind of like a white guy, often scarred, decided not to shave that day, hair kind of messy, usually brown. It's not the most diverse group. And that's not to say that there's a problem with any of these guys. It would be fantastic if I had other screens I could point to for other people who also want to play games. If you remember, I get into the game industry in 1981, but it wasn't until 1986 that I could actually play a female character in a game. And in that game, it was Leather Goddesses of Phobos, of all possible games. And this is the first time you were able to play a female character in the game. Up to that point in time, you could actually play any of these things. And I could be a rocket silo, a ball, an airplane. I could be a mouse, a police mouse or police. I could be a monkey. I could be a pool ball. I could be a ghost as long as I was a male ghost, but I couldn't be a woman. And nothing says like you don't actually belong in games, like not being able to choose yourself as a character. And even our most iconic characters like Princess Peach and Mario, like Princess Peach needs to be rescued. But what if she was a self-rescuing princess? Or even better, what if she was going out to rescue somebody? And it's not like this happened just in the 70s, like it's still kind of happening. And it goes right until today. So this game is about 10 years ago, 10 years old at this point in time, but it's a beautiful game. Don't get me wrong. Absolutely beautiful, plays really well. But if you think about it, like she's basically being dragged through this world. It's a game called Ico, if you don't know. And so he kind of is just like dragging her through this world. Or more recently, this is 2014, this is a game called Assassin's Creed Unity. And they decided there were going to be no female characters in this game. And when people said, well, why aren't there female characters? They said, well, because it required additional work. And so they had to cut the female assassins. So it ended up resulting in some exceptionally great cosplay. But that doesn't make any sense, right? Like, and also recently, this is 2014, Hearthstone, kind of trying to stick with the Olympics, let's separate people by gender, decided that women were not allowed to play. Needless to say, this went over like a lead balloon weighed down by a ton of rocks. I mean, within 24 hours, this was gone. But statistically speaking, you have a better chance of being a robot, a dog, a hedgehog than a female lead in a game. And sometimes we hear that because like, well, how many women play games? Well, we now know that women actually are the majority of players in games. But how many hedgehogs play games, right? Like we all deserve a chance to see ourselves in the games. And sometimes when we do, this is what we look like. Like if any women are watching this, it probably looks painful to you, or that somebody's surgically sewed to nearly overblown water balloons to her. And so we see something like this, or this woman who looks like she's, on the way to a well-armed stripping engagement. And that's not to say that these costumes aren't okay, but like they don't need to be the only costumes that are available to female characters. And if we take something like this, and these are, costumes have gotten somewhat better, but this was sort of the peak of we've lost our mind costumes, and compare that to traditional male characters, right? Like these are our classic male heroes, and the issues around sexualization just don't exist. And if we take the original Tomb Raider box, and you may not have access to this, but the original Tomb Raider box on that fold out, if you put your hand across the front of it, the box is actually embossed. And I'll give you a guess which part of the box they actually chose to emboss. So that's where we were at that particular time. Now, fortunately, we've come a very long way since that time, and there's been some really excellent games that do feature female leads, like Her Story or Gone Home, or the incomparable Life is Strange, which I absolutely loved. But of course, it's not just women that this happens to. People of color, LGBTQI folks struggle to find themselves in games really at all. In the original Sims, you may not know this, but gay characters actually couldn't marry or fall in love. And then in a huge scandal, that nearly resulted in this game getting re-rated to AO. Male characters could kiss. I know, shocking stuff, but it almost caused this game to be rated adults only. And this has happened fairly recently in the overall scheme of things. So, in World of Warcraft, there was a guild called the Gay Boys. So they were getting harassed about their name, and so they complained about this. And the solution was to change your name was the solution. So I translate that to get back in the closet. It's for your own good. So needless to say, this was not well received, and the community protested in both cases. And in the time it happened in 2006, they organized a gay cruise, a pride parade, all kinds of stuff inside of World of Warcraft. And to my knowledge, it is the first civil rights protest in a virtual world. And it was a successful one. And so if you are a person of color, here's something that happened. Basically, how people decided to solve things and make games more inclusive was to add something called the brown slider. And so it resulted, because they didn't add really any different types of faces, it ended up with very European characters with exceptionally dark skin tones, or something like this, where you are basically, the face isn't changing at all. It's just changing your level of darkness, but you still look extremely Caucasian, right? And this is not something, this is something that we should be well beyond at this point in time. So I remember my own son, he's significantly darker than I am, and he has my hair, but he has his father's skin color. And he could even adjust his glabella, which is this bit between your eyes. And I only know the name of that because of a game that allowed me to do it. But he couldn't make a character that had my hair and his skin tone, which is ridiculous. Like, part of the reason I think this is such a huge problem is because games are the #1 form of media consumed by our youth today. And if they can't even see themselves represented in a game, if they can't be themselves, what does that tell them? And I think, ultimately, we all want to see ourselves in games, regardless of who we are, how old we are, or where we're from. Like, we all want to be heroes in our own story. And when I'm asked, which I regularly am, which means I'm regularly wrong, where the future of games is going to go, I genuinely don't know. Like, anytime that I have said where I think it will be in 5 years, I am wrong. Games continuously surprise me. They grow so fast. And if there's one thing I am super grateful for, it's that I've been here for the first 40 years of games. And those 40 years have continuously surprised me. And so what keeps me going and what keeps me inspired are the people who will be here for the next 40 years, and the people creating tomorrow's stories, and the kids just learning how to code or to write or to design and to create. And before I close, there's one thing I do want to say, because I know I'm talking to a bunch of students, is that if you are someone like me, if you are like one of those weird Stranger Things kids, you were the nerd, you were the one who didn't feel like you fit in. The great thing about the game industry is if you feel different, your unique story is your superpower in games. And I would be shocked if there weren't a place for you here. There are so many weird, nerdy people who didn't fit in games that we all fit in here. And your uniqueness, that thing about you that you feel is different, is the one unique story that you can tell that nobody else can tell. And if you've had a challenging story, like John hasn't talked in his previous talk, he didn't talk about his past, but John's story actually goes from being abandoned in a desert, really, when he was a little kid. And I've had my family, as I mentioned, we were low income, and there were a lot of interesting things going on. But these tough times, like, if you want to know, like, the most successful people I know in the game industry have similar backgrounds. So if that's your story, I mean, I think people who know difficulty also know joy. And that is tremendous strength for them, and to their credit. And that is it for me.
Fantastic. Thank you, Brenda. Some really, really great insights there. And that message sort of about the diversity in games is exactly what we are trying to get through to students at the moment. And I really do believe that we've got a generation of students who are more aware of diversity in games, and hopefully will change the games industry, because it is very behind, in terms of all aspects of diversity, you know, from colour through gender, and obviously with transgender issues at the moment as well. And there are games that are great and are addressing it, but they really do need to be more. And hopefully the generation of coders and games artists that we're bringing through now will change things and make things better for everybody, I hope. Anyway. So thank you very much for that. Some really good comments coming in from the students, and once again we've got some great questions. So I've got a question here from Katerina linked into that, just sort of asking for advice from you as a woman who's obviously been in the games industry for a long time and seen it develop and change. What advice would you give to a young woman wanting to get into the industry now? And have you got any thoughts about the future of that as well?
Well, the game industry, when I first started, there were 5 women, maybe. At least that's all I knew. And the game industry has certainly grown since that point in time. But I would say if you're coming into the industry, women in the industry tend to be pretty well networked and also really supportive. So I would say whether or not you get yourself somebody who is kind of where you want to be at, find a mentor. I think that's incredibly important. You know, my email, it was on that slide there. It's just brenda@romero.com. You know, feel free to reach out to me. I'm happy to help and happy to point you in a different direction. I would say that the game industry, obviously, it's ridiculously competitive. But now, because women are like, I skipped over this. Well, it just wasn't a part of my talk, but because games are like more and more women are playing games, and now the majority, for the first time in my career in about the mid 2010s, I started hearing like, we need a female game designer. We need more women on the team. And I'm hearing that more and more and more. So I think the industry is heading in the right direction, but I still think it's valuable no matter who you are, no matter what you are, no matter where you are. Find a mentor who reminds you of you, who can help you along the path.
Another question here from Caitlin, specifically about the section that you did about sort of how games are being used in different ways. So in terms of educational games, for example, what do you think is the limiting factor in making educational games fun? Because it's almost as if you say, oh, this is an educational game, and people go, okay, and switch off straight away, don't they? So have you got any thoughts on that?
I do. So a lot of educational games start with the educator first, right? And the game industry the educator is not necessarily going to make something fun. They're going to take broccoli and they're going to cover it in chocolate and try to feed it to somebody, and it's not going to go well. The game industry had a similar issue with Wii Fit, I would say. So while a lot of people bought Wii Fit, people in the end were not willing to pay more money for something they could do for free outside, particularly because it was more cumbersome. You could buy a treadmill in some cases, you know, for the same price. And so really where we get the best mix of people, or the best quality of games is when we get that mix of people. We get educators coming together with game designers. The games as education at the moment it's slower than many other things for 2 primary reasons. One, because in the early 80s, there was a massive dumping on the industry, basically, of subpar games, and it led to the crash of the video game industry back then. So people have been, you know, leery of it since that time, but also the places that would be most likely to buy educational games our schools or our parents. And until we get to a point where parents can see the value in games and in education, as opposed to just say apps, we still have a bit of growth to do there. And I think it's mostly on the part of the buyer. Like I have, you know, educating people that games are educational. So I mean, if you think about Pokemon, for instance, Pokemon is far more complicated than the periodic table of elements, but yet kids can memorize that, but not periodic table of elements. So if we could take whatever we have here and put it there, we would have tremendous gains. So there's loads of room to go. If that's something you're interested in, good, because there's a lot of growth that can still happen there.
Absolutely, yeah, and it's a fascinating area in general. I think really how people perceive things. So I've got some questions here about the diversity issues as well. So this person, Callum, has played a game from around 2008. Hasn't mentioned what game it is actually, but it says it had incredible representation of different cultures, sexualities and issues, and provided a well-versed story that honed in on the said issues. But unfortunately, it was overlooked at the time the game was released. If it was released nowadays, it would have had a more widespread effect. Are there any games that you feel might have come out at the wrong time and, you know, and maybe did do things really well, but just because at the time it wasn't on trend, as it were, it's been swamped and disappeared a little bit. So that might be a good recommendation opportunity.
Yeah, I mean, I would love to know what that game is.
Yeah, Callum, can you post and let us know what the game is?
Yeah, I would love to know about that. Yeah, I think one of the things that's been interesting to me in like the last pitch round. So I usually I'm pitching a game every 5 years, usually. And so I've noticed like in the last pitch round, which was 5 years ago, I would get questions from every single publisher we talked to. Can you play as a female character in the game? And so in Empire of Sin, I just decided to remove genders. I don't particularly care who you are. You be you be whoever you want to be. You be you. And none of the characters in the game actually have genders. But it was for the first time I was hearing publishers talking about how important diversity was to them. And that's not something I would have heard 10 years ago or 15 years ago. So to me, you know, this is something, if you're making a game, be prepared and you want publishers to pick it up, be prepared to provide some of that. And even we're starting to see, this is more challenging to do and it requires a hell of a designer. But we're starting to even see diversity in play styles. So if you take a look at Dishonored, where you could, you know, on the one hand, you could sort of stealth your way through the game, or you could fight your way through the game. We're starting to see even that level of you know, player diversity, not just in the characters, but also in the play styles.
Fantastic, yeah. What's the most important thing that you look for in terms of games design yourself when you're playing a game? What are you looking out for?
Oh God, so many things, but so many things. I thought, funny enough, I'll answer the question you didn't, that I thought you were going to say, which is, what do I look for? Because I think it's particularly useful for Confetti. Is when I'm looking to hire a game designer, I want to see D&D or some board game experience on the resume. Always, not even that. To me is just that, you know, that's the price of entry, and you'd be surprised how many people have not played D&D or don't have a board game background. But what are the things I'm looking for? So when I'm playing, I want to make sure like it is really the second to second play. Am I immersed second to second? Is there something I want to do? Am I excited to get going? Is time starting to disappear? Because if you don't have that second to second gameplay, you're not going to have the minute to minute. You're not going to have the 5 minute to 5 minute. And if you can't sustain that, like the whole rest of the game is lost. So I'm really just trying to nail the second to second gameplay.
Yeah, I think it's always one of those good things when you don't realise how long you've been playing a game. That's generally a good sign, isn't it? When you
it's the necessary sign.
Yeah, absolutely. Just going to scroll through because I've got loads and loads of questions at the moment, so I've just quite a lot of them to go through. I'm trying to choose relevant ones that work. So we've got a question from Joe for I guess for both of you as well, if John's back around. Yeah, brilliant. So maybe just give us an insight into the games that you're playing at the moment. Everyone's always interested in what game, not necessarily what's your favourite game, but like what are you playing at the moment? What games are floating your boats at the moment, the pair of you?
You want me to go first?
I can answer John because he plays it. John plays it every single night. He plays it till about 11, which sometimes is about 4. And it's pretty great because I haven't seen a game take him like this in a long time.
I'm a big fan of the original Ghost Recon, like the original 2000 version that Brian Upton designed. And I played the other ones after that, but they never really captured me until Breakpoint. I played Wildlands, which is really good, but Breakpoint just nailed it. And you know, you turn all the graphic settings on ultimate. It looks amazing on even a 2060 graphics card. Super fast frame rate, but it looks like real life, you know, like it's super realistic. And it's an open world full of locations that you can just like land and just conquer the base or when you lose, you're spawned right back outside the base and it's all reset. Like now you got to start over. But it's an open world game like World of Warcraft, but it's Ghost Recon and it's incredible. Also playing Valheim, so I have a 24/7 dedicated Valheim server running, so can just jump in there, at any time and continue building and getting past the bosses. And it's got a really great second to second gameplay. But yeah, but Ghost Recon, they fight for attention. But Breakpoint is just a little bit above Valheim right now. And I've done everything in Breakpoint. Like I've finished all the DLCs, everything that they've come out with. I've basically uncovered everything in the world on the maps. It's nuts. There's still stuff. I just found something last night, a collectible that I never got before. I can't believe it. And I mean, I conquered everything. Unbelievable. There's still some stuff in the game. It's such a good game.
I'm glad you mentioned Wildlands as well, because that often gets overlooked, I think, with the Ghost Recon games. I thought that was a great game too. It was a really interesting setting, I felt, for that game.
If you're on Reddit, everyone on Reddit thinks Breakpoint's trash and that Wildlands is the best one. But it's the opposite for me. I like Wildlands. It's really good, but that was what you needed. It's like EverQuest needed to be there for World of Warcraft to be such a great game. Yeah. And Ultima Online had to be there for EverQuest to be a great game. So, Wildlands had to be there for Breakpoint to be awesome.
Fantastic. Brenda, what about you?
Having just come off of a game, a lot of my game playing is still my game. However, I would say it's between two different games. It's Hades or it's Total War Warhammer 2. So I like playing strategy games. There's a guy that I work with, Chris King. He was a designer at Paradox for 20 years, and he's got me into Total War Warhammer 2. And we have we have an unacceptable amount of Warhammer figures in the house, honestly. So for me, it's interesting because I have played a hell of a lot of Warhammer, and now I'm playing Total War Warhammer 2. I really like Creative Assembly's games. I think they do some fantastic stuff. It is, you're absolutely right, Sophie. It is the opposite of a problem. Anyway, it's our house. We just have to. I think our friends' kids. Our kids' friends think we're either the coolest parents who have ever lived or like the weirdest parents. Possibly.
But we actually get little 8-year-old kids running up to our window. The neighborhood kids come up to the window. We hand them posters and stuff for video games.
Yeah. We had John was on in Ireland. Our sort of our version of BBC is called RTE, and so he was on there. And I guess some kids in the neighborhood put 2 and 2 together in one day. So you can't. Well, I guess you can see that there's a window right here. One day, an audience of kids,
8-year-olds
outside the window, and I'm just like, what's going on? So I go outside and I take a look, and they want to meet John. Is this where the Doom guy lives? They said. And they came bearing art for him. It was really actually fantastic.
They made little cards and stuff.
Little cards and all this stuff. So we gave him pins and posters. It was wonderful. Absolutely wonderful. Yeah.
That's lovely. That is. You've warmed the cockles of my heart saying that you Warhammer people as well, because I love Warhammer. And we've had Games Workshop this week as well. Matt from the Miniatures Design team came and did a great talk.
Oh man, lucky you.
Our son Donovan is massively into Warhammer. Like, he has hundreds of figurines. He plays the Total Warhammer. It's crazy. He knows everything about it. He loves the lore. It's like
that's become a bit of a problem because
it's the opposite of a problem.
Right, it's the opposite of a problem. Well, here's what the problem is. With you playing Ghost Recon, the kids can't say, "Let me tell you about first-person shooters, old man," right? Like, because you can just go, "I invented." Anyway, but with the kids, like every time Donovan comes in, he'll come in that way, and he'll see that I'm playing. He's like, "What are you doing?" And then it's it's like lectures, like as if. So anyway, it's just best if I lock the door. Anyway, that's what we're doing.
Fantastic.
Yeah, I noticed in the chat, like, Hades is absolutely worth a check. In fact, I would even advise,
Yeah.
especially for aspiring game developers, there's a fantastic series on YouTube about the development of Hades and how they went out in early access and the decisions that they made.
It's
Almost
critical, yeah.
mandatory viewing, I think. It's fantastic. Yeah, no clip documentaries are great.
Yeah, Danny's great.
I've got a question here from Saul. I guess, again, probably both of you for this one. I think because I'm sure you'll probably both have been involved at some point, or at least have knowledge of it. So about feelings on games jams, because again, we've done a really cool games jam. We've done 2 games jams actually this week, one video games jam and one tabletop games jam as well. Any cool stories or any thoughts on games jams from either of you?
God, we love it. Gunman Taco Truck is a game that we came out with in 2017 that was a game jam game. And we did game jams, about 5 or 6 of us every weekend. Once a month, we would spend from Friday, afternoon until Sunday night, all game jamming on Gunman Taco Truck. And we released it when the game was done, and we thought it was great. And Apple actually just chose it multiple times to focus on their app store, basically saying it's games we love, and interviewed Donovan for the relaunch of the app store when they started doing articles and stuff. So there's an interview with Donovan on there. So yeah, a game jam led to a published game, and we love game jamming. So the people in our office, they do game jams together. I do game jams with them. We publish our games that we do as game jams. There's a 10-hour game jam game that we made called July 4th, 1976. That is on playbarf.com. It's also on the App Store. It's an Android game. It's a desktop game. It's an iOS game. So it's on all these platforms. We did it in 10 hours. Wow. In one day.
Fantastic.
Just 2 of us.
That actually leads into another question as well, from which I noticed earlier that I'm going to pick up on. Have you got any tips for learning how to do things quickly like that? Because when you were doing your presentation, you talked about how you had to learn how to code the Super Nintendo, in, what was it, 3 weeks to do that game turnaround?
Yep.
Which must have been a hefty task to do. Have you got any tips for learning how to do things like that quickly?
Well, if you're going to do a game jam, if you're trying to do something very quickly during a game jam, do what you know and try and come up with a really great design. And if you feel like you were limited in some way while you're making the game during the game jam, then that's like outside the game jam, start learning a bunch of stuff, because learning does take a lot of time. And so when you know like how to do it, like when you know how to code fast, when you know how to like do art quickly, do stuff in pixel art mode, how to compose quickly and do sound effects quickly, use those skills, and during a game jam you actually will hone those skills even better because you're doing it quickly. But outside of that, it takes a long time to actually get up to speed on all of these things. So spend the time, and the game jams will show you where you're limited in certain things. So it's like game jams are unbelievably great for just making stuff quickly. You give yourself a really great time limit. And the ones that we were doing, so our town of Galway in Ireland has a game jam every year, and they give a themed question out at 10 o'clock in the morning. So everyone's sitting there waiting on their computers. They're like, like they're peeling out and ready to go. And then the theme comes out, and then everybody starts designing quickly with each other to figure out what are we going to do with this theme, and then start making a plan and executing that. And they have just that one day to do it. So it's really, really fun to have limitations like that. And it also is like, now you get to like see how fast you can go with what you know. And it's really fun to do that. But it's not the time to be learning anything during a game jam, like at all. You're using everything that you know. But yeah, I could talk forever about game jams. I love them.
Yeah, I think like that's just when you go into game jams, and I think it's important to like by the time when they switched over to do the Super Nintendo version, they had already been coding at that point in time for maybe 13 years, were you?
Yeah. Yep.
at that point. So
In assembly
so,
language.
so they were,
You
it was a
know,
bunch of experts going, we're experts here, now we must be experts here. And when we do a game jam, like I love game jams because you're constrained, like super constrained by what you're doing. You're just trying to get it makes you focus on the core. Like, what is the absolute boiled down essence of this game? Let's get it done.
Yep.
You're not thinking of, oh, it would be cool if, like, you're just trying to get that small thing done. And I feel like in some sense, like early access games are an evolution of a game jam process, right? Like, we're going to make this thing and we're going to try to just get it up and off the ground. Now we're going to polish this thing. But I think I think working in game jam form makes you a better game developer. Just,
Yeah.
versus putting, like 100 hours of code into this one feature that no longer works. It is a sheep, Lucas, by the arm. It's not a real sheep. Well, it is a real sheep. It's not an alive sheep. Nor is it a stuffed sheep. This is just now a very weird. Anyway, game jams make you better, but yeah, it is a sheep by the armchair.
Does the sheep have a name?
The sheep's name, I forget what I called it.
If not, we could probably get the students to come up with a name for it. That's all I'm thinking.
The company that sells it is a company called The Sheep here in Galway.
Yeah, or Sheep 352 or something. Yeah.
We won't name it Ian. We have too many Ians already.
Oh yeah, we do. Yeah, there's a million Ians. Yeah, Sean the Sheep. Sean's a good name. I'll go with Sean. Yeah, Sean the Sheep. That's fun.
Sean of the Sheep.
Excellent. I've got a good question here from Stuart. I think probably addressed to both of you, but I guess maybe Brenda, because I know some of the things that you've done probably cross over into this a little bit. Have either of you had any experience with designers or coders who didn't necessarily study gaming design and worked in other areas of the creative industries? Stuart, I've got Sean on the brain now, you see, we've got Sean on the sheet. Stuart studies theatre design and live performance, but has an interest in gaming, so he's not really coming from a gaming background. Just wondering if there's any experience that you've had with people that have come from different backgrounds and how they've helped in the games design process, I suppose.
Well, loads of people, like we've had, I'm always remember, like I've worked with so many people who have gotten their PhD in physics or biology or something, and then wanted to get into games. John and I, some of the most hardcore coders in the game industry actually come from hardware. Some of the most dedicated coders in the industry come from banking, where they're like, I never want to be bored like this again. People who have been, whether, in fact, Life is Strange is one of the games that I mentioned. So the writer for Life is Strange was, funny enough, was one of John's best friends as a kid, and they're still very close friends, Christian Devine. Christian was in, it seems somebody's saying audio.
Yeah, it's hard to hear you.
It might be the wonderful headset running down, is it?
Oh, no, it's got tons of time, but hold on. This is why you have this. What is it? I guess my job is to take all of the tech problems. Yeah, I'll blame Sean. Give me 1 second. I'll change the audio. John, you go ahead and answer that if you don't mind.
Yeah, I've had friends who were like electrical engineer type, students who were like, they're getting their PhD. It took them 11 years to get through school to finally get a PhD, and there was no way that they were going to do electrical engineering. They loved game programming, so they basically got their PhD and never used that knowledge gained from that. They immediately went to work at Sony, and and it's like, if you like at id Software, even as an example, most of the people that had degrees at id Software did not have a degree in anything that they were doing there. So our CEO, Jay Wilbur, the biz guy, had a computer science degree. Tom Hall, the game designer, had a computer science degree. Kevin Cloud, one of the two artists, had a political science degree. Sandy Peterson, game designer, had a zoologist degree, a zoology degree. So, I didn't have a degree, and John Carmack didn't have a degree. So it was basically nobody there had a degree in what they were doing at the company. So people come from all over the place. As an example, Bobby Prince, our musician, he was a lawyer. Don't don't worry about it.
Yeah.
Is my audio okay now?
Yes.
Good. I think a lot of people too, when they come to games, it's at least for me growing up. I think the only reason I succeeded in getting into games is because I had a brother who was a professional musician before me. And also my mother thought my access to computers was great. But I'm sure that a lot of people when they're growing up, and especially like people in the game industry are ridiculously bright. And so, I'm sure there's loads of parents who see this ridiculously bright kid who announces with their ridiculously bright brain that what they want to do is make the next Call of Duty or whatever. They're like, no, you could have been a doctor, a lawyer, whatever, or they perceive that there's no job there or no, whereas actually the game industry is pretty lucrative, especially for people who've been very successful, or who have, sorry, obviously it's lucrative if you've been very successful, but for people who have, created well-known games. So I think it's really normal for people to come in from a field that is not just pure games. Just because a lot of people wouldn't be pushed into a program, say like Confetti.
I think it's about getting that mix of people. I think you've both experienced that in your careers. That it's if everybody has the same interests and everybody is the same, then it's going to be a fairly dull project.
Yeah.
It makes it a good project to work on if you've got people from different backgrounds. So I think that's a really important thing for students to understand. Certainly.
Yeah.
I've got a question about Empire of Sin, because I think we do need to plug what you've done recently, because it's a great game. Number one. I'm really intrigued by the fact that it had that turn-based system, because one of my favourite games ever made is a really old game called Laser Squad, which was one of the first. It was the game that inspired XCOM and all that kind of stuff. I think many moons ago, wasn't it? So I love those kind of games, and there hasn't been a really good one for a while, and your one's really nice. So I just wondered what inspired you to do it like that, and maybe you could just tell us a bit about the game. So because that's the most recent thing you've done, of course.
Yeah, it's the most recent for me. That's my most recent game. John did music on it, some production.
Sound effects.
Huh?
Sound effects and programming.
Yeah, the audio. So I guess for me, like I love turn-based games. So I love XCOM. I love Civilization. So for this game, and also there was a game that designed by Ian Curry and Linda Curry and Sean Ling called Jagged Alliance, and I also love that game. I did writing on that game. So this was really like what would happen. I wanted to make a game in Prohibition era Chicago, and I've wanted to make a game like this for 20 years. So sometimes you might have a space of an idea, like I want to make a game about something, but you haven't figured out how that will come together. So fast forward 20 years, and I'm like, what if instead of choosing Gandhi or Napoleon, you were choosing Al Capone or Daniel McKee Jackson? And what if the combat was like something like XCOM? And what if you hired gangsters? And when that happened, it was just like, I know exactly what this game needs to be. And so, we released the game in December. There were a couple of exploits in the game, one of which unbelievably, lets you win the game like basically like that. So, and I think this is, it's a part of game development as well. You're not always going to release something that's like, you're not always going to release a Doom, right? Sometimes you will release a Daikatana, right? Or sometimes you will release a game that functionally is good and it's fun, but its exploits are painful, right? So what do? You get in there and you just get in there and fight the good fight. And, in our case, it was, fortunately, we are now in a time where when things like that are found, you can get the patches out there, which we did. We released 2 within a really short amount of time. We've spent 2 big updates since then.
Brill. I really like the game, so if you haven't checked it out, check it out. And also, I suppose it would be useful to mention as well, Sigil as well now. We've got some questions come in about Sigil, and I think the one that's just come up in the chat as well was interesting about, obviously Sigil was revisiting Doom. Have you ever thought about revisiting Quake and adding extra bits into Quake as well? in the same way
course.
that you do with Sigil. Yeah.
Yeah. Hexen, Quake, you name it. Probably wouldn't do anything else in Daikatana, just because there's not enough people that really remember the game well. It does have a following. It has very dedicated modders on it. They've actually fixed the game, and released a big patch, 1.3 patch. And people play Daikatana Deathmatch on a daily basis, but it's just still not. It's not a really big game. But there's other games that we're releasing as well. So Dangerous Dave is a game that I made in 1990, just before we started making Gamer's Edge games together. Dangerous Dave was one of the demonstration games for the Gamer's Edge product, and it was released for free as a demo. That game, I made it in 1 month, and it got bigger than Doom in India and Pakistan, because every computer that was sold in those countries had Dave on it. So, it's been played more than anything. But we're re-releasing Dangerous Dave, like a new version for desktop, and then all the other Dave games. There's about 9 Dangerous Dave games in total, and they're all going to be released in a big box format. And the big box format is going to be like a board game where the top comes down on top. It's a very, very nice box.
The Sigil box is beautiful. That big
the
box.
Beast box,
Yeah,
it
that's
is
so
awesome.
Nice. Yeah. I got the it's one of my most prized possessions is the id Anthology box that came out years and years ago, and you got the little sort of pewter demon,
cyber demon that was in there.
Yeah.
I have 2 of them right here.
Yeah, fantastic.
I have 2 of those boxes and the Beast box.
Yeah, great. So let me just pull another question, because I'm conscious that we're running out of time, so I don't want to be too deep questions at the moment. So we've got some questions about level design. Where do you get inspiration for level design? And also, there was a question about how do you stop a level from becoming too complex? Because I guess, like all creative things, you can get kind of into the thing, can't you, and lose relativity on it. So how do you stop a level becoming too complex?
So one way that's pretty easy, like it's funny, like with Quake as an example, how do you, like, because it's a full 3D space, how are you going to limit all the stuff that you could possibly do in 3D? Well, it's real easy. Your map file can't be bigger than 1.4 megabytes. There it is. That's what we did in Quake. If your map file was bigger than 1.4 megabytes, you had to change your level to make it smaller. And that meant that, like, the maps could only be a certain size, which meant they couldn't go on forever. And say designing Sigil, when I decide, like, okay, I'm going to have maps that are this size and this size and this size because I want them to get a little bit bigger, what I'll do is I'll draw like a ruler chunk on the sides, and my map can't go outside that boundary. Like, I have to make my map within that area, and that constrains me from just making something that goes on forever. And it's great because within that space I can start getting really insidious. I can start figuring out where to hide monsters that teleport in, where to put cool secret rooms and traps and all this within a really tight space. And it's really fun because, like, your constraint is space, is size. And so that's how I basically do Sigil levels. So yeah, constrain yourself in some way, whether it's the amount of time it's going to take to build it, the size of the file, the size of the dimensions on the screen, like anything. Just come up with a constraint and just obey it and do it, and then move on to the next thing.
That's really good advice. Yeah, fantastic. I've got a random question from Ryan Posey. This is a relevant one, I think. Favorite Warhammer faction for both of you?
I feel like I'm too early. I feel like I'm too early to choose a faction just yet.
Your audio cut out again.
I don't know what to say. I've tried 2 mics.
It's going out, still going out. It's all right. It's
okay.
fine. It's fine.
I'm too early to say. At this point in time, I'm still experimenting. I probably have maybe 20 hours in the game, 20, 25 hours.
Good game. Good
maybe.
game, though.
Yeah, here I'm going. This is one of the great benefits of having Steam right next to me. I can see exactly
Yeah.
how far I am.
I
So
haven't
I'm
really played the Warhammer stuff that much, but I listen to Donovan talk about it all the time, and Chaos Knights sound like that's me.
They're
it
pretty cool. Yeah,
probably is
I
true.
would say John is definitely chaos. You can, I think we'd all predict that one. Yeah. Okay, and I'll do one more. So this is about motivation. I think this is a really good question, and definitely at the moment very much relevant for students and indeed anybody that's in lockdown and facing the perils of lockdown. So how do you keep motivation going? You know, and when you've got to a point where you've had a bad time maybe, and motivations are low, how have you managed to get that back up? I guess this is for both of you as well.
Well, I have so much stuff to do. Like, we have an unbelievable amount of work that we can do, and it's all game stuff. It's all has to do with. It's not just the same game; it's a bunch of different games. It's like I'm motivated to make game stuff and then play game stuff. So um, it's all about like pushing something forward in some way. I have, I don't know, 4 projects going at one time typically. And in what I do during the day at work is there's a bunch of different things that I do during the day. Um, and I get to work with a really great team, and they're motivating because they're positive and they're fun. And like we do our stand-ups in the morning, and it's always hilarious because we have a question that everyone has to answer that is always hilarious. Like, what's your favorite whatever, or what do you hate? Like, what's your favorite pen color was today's. You wouldn't believe the factions around black and blue and red and green. It's hilarious, but every day is a really good time working with a really great team and making something really great. Like Empire of Sin is a really good game, and it gets better very quickly on a daily basis, and we're releasing stuff all the time. And it's incredible the amount that gets poured into this game, and this team is just like very engaged and busy making stuff. And how can you when you're around people like that, how can you not be part of that river of energy poured towards something? And so that's what we kind of live in on a daily basis, is just being energized with the people that we're working with and always making new stuff constantly. So it's like nonstop. And I think we're just used to that, being self-driven for decades. We're just used to making new things all the time. Like Brenda, if she was on vacation, she'll invent about 5 businesses while she's on vacation.
That said though, like just after shipping, a game, like my brain was ruined, right? I mean, just really tired because it's even if you're not working, if you're not, none of us were working insane hours. Fortunately, I mean,
Your audio cut out again, I think.
I have no idea what I'm doing.
It's there. It's just very quiet. It is there.
It is
Yeah,
okay.
it's just quite quiet.
I have no idea what is causing any change. How unbelievably bizarre. Let me try turning this
Maybe
way
it was
up.
okay. It's fine for everybody. Maybe it's just
Okay.
me.
Okay,
Sorry.
so it's just you guys.
It is quiet, but it's there.
All right. Well, I guess some days the gremlins are with you, and this must be one of those days. So, after I ship the game, like I do make sure right now that when I finish work, that the weekends are 100% off the machine. So you can't see here, but it's like my daughter calls it like what is flight control, right? There's 3 monitors. Each one of the monitors has multiple screens on it. Uh, so I probably have 12 different screens, even though 3 monitors, 12 different screens, and it's just it's always something's always going off on it. So on the weekends I fully back away from the machine. um, I may play games, but if I play games, it's during work and it's during work hours. Now there will be a point in time where I will return to my normal super nerdy self, but right now I'm making sure that it's just back away from the machine, and I this is going to sound, this won't sound nuts to John, but to people who don't know me, but like I pretty rigorously schedule my free time. Like I will be reading a book this weekend. I already know which book I will be reading. I'm planning to do some writing this weekend, right? So just making sure that when you are in a creative endeavor, it is a torrent that comes from you to create something. And the same sort of stuff needs to come back. And whether that is, playing something that's really great that inspires you, reading a book that inspires you, or going and doing something with the kids, writing, that sort of stuff. You have to put back what you've given out. And for me, Empire of Sin was 4 years of hard work. We're just barely post launch with the game. So yeah, I take that sort of stuff seriously. I think John and I, we both really love games, which helps. But neither one of us wants to burn out. And I don't know. I don't know that that's really possible with either one of us. But at the same time, I don't want to get myself into a situation that I don't feel like I enjoy coming to work or whatever. We work with a really great group of people, and we've that even our team has been carefully curated.
Do you think that's helped when you've moved over to Ireland now? Is that part of that being able to disconnect probably from the sort of the world a little bit where you are?
I think with John and I, it's that he and I, like, we have different names, but fundamentally we're like one person. And we are shockingly similar. We have very similar backgrounds. We have been in games since we were little kids. It's all either one of us have ever wanted to do. We both of us grew up in the game industry. So I think the thing that helped us, actually, if I had to say, like, the things that helped us most is probably that we try to be good to the people that we work with, right? We want to have, if you're not having fun making games, you're probably not going to make a fun game. And we tend to operate conservatively. So both in the designs that we have, like let's not do something that we don't think we can do. Like, let's make sure that we know. But I don't know, like, coming to Ireland, we just really wanted to be here. We really wanted to, we really wanted to come here. And so we were going to make it work, even if it was just the two of us.
Yeah, we're as busy in Ireland as we were in Silicon Valley. I mean, it's extremely busy here.
The scenery might be nicer though, I don't know.
Oh yeah. The scenery is like not even close to even the same. I was really surprised in Silicon Valley how much of a concrete jungle it was and how much of it was still 1960s architecture, knowing that there are billions of dollars everywhere in Silicon Valley, that I'm still looking at really old 60s and 70s construction. It's like, where's the insane cool buildings,
The crazy
in
futuristic
Ireland,
building, yeah.
in Ireland, it's all green, it's
Yeah.
it's like Wales, it's just like, it looks amazing, or Scotland.
Yeah, which in itself must be inspiring as well, I guess. So that's part of it, isn't it? Okay, thank you so much for being here with us today. I know the students have really enjoyed it. I think they'll do the traditional typing the word clap multiple times now in the chat, which replaces applause, which is quite a surreal experience. But if you bring the child, there'll be loads of thank yous and clapping, I'm sure, in there. Thank you so much for being here with us. As I said at the beginning, if you can just hang around until we've booted all the students out, which for us might take a while because we had about 350 in at one point. So just bear with us to do that. And ordinarily at this point, I'd be saying book on to other events, students, because there's loads of exciting stuff happen in industry. But this is the last event for us for Industry Week. I think we've got Steve Albini at the moment doing a talk in another... as well for us at Confetti, another iconic figure from the world of music. Once again, let me just say thank you to John and Brenda for being here. It's been absolutely fantastic. As I say, my 20-year-old self is just still having kittens inside me mentally at the moment because I spent so much time on Quake. I hope
that we can, when all this passes, that we can come over and do this in person, and maybe you and John can have a game of Quake together.
That would be amazing.
Yeah,
that would be
deathmatch.
amazing. And
Just try
I'll
it.
take you to Games Workshop and introduce you
Deal.
to those guys. Yeah.
We're in.
Yeah.
We'll take Donovan in as well. Yeah.
Oh,
yeah.
gosh, he would love it.
You would go insane.
Yeah, he would.
Brilliant. That sounds amazing. Okay, so what will happen now, we will kick all the students out, all those pesky students. If you just hang around, have a cup of tea, have a break for a minute.
Yeah.
Spoiler: Dan loses. Alistair, you're probably right about that. I haven't seen him win I haven't seen John lose in a very long time.
Okie dokie. So yeah, if you just want to mute yourselves, we'll put the holding screen back up, and
Thanks,
I'll come back to you
everybody.
in a few seconds. Okay.
All right,
Have
thank
fun
you so
making
much.
games. Keep making them.